Yeah, so the title of the workshop is Dialogue on Governance to Develop Sustainable Forest Landscapes for Production of Wood for Energy and the Bioeconomy. And we have a specific focus on the Baltic states today. The whole workshop is motivated by this being a debated issue now, of course, among those involved, but also in the media. And we felt that some of us have been working with this from a research point of view or in the sector for many years, and would like to add or contribute to the debate, and also maybe contributing to showing the diversity of situations that we have in our different countries for these issues. So the purpose for today is basically to inform all, to connect people, creating better understanding of why things looks like what they look like in different places. So just wanting to say also that there's a whole group behind the planning of this workshop. I've listed them here. You can also find the names and their contact information in the workshop website and the organizations behind it here. So I urge you also to contact any of these from different countries if you have any country-specific questions or anything. And then moving on to the program for today, just briefly running you through it here after the introduction. We will have Liviu from Romania talk about forest ownership in Europe, so kind of setting the scene for us. Then Roman from the Sustainable Biomass program will talk about these issues from a certification scheme point of view. And Mikhel Jugaste will afterwards follow to talk about how what are his experiences being certified. And I should maybe mention also that today the focus is on verification of sustainability of forest management. So looking at all the actors in the supply chain and the people involved. So these are the certification schemes. And as I said again, Mikhel Jugaste, who's also a certified organization. And then Gerimantas will contribute from Preferred by Nature after the break. He's from a certifying organization. So that means we have these three parties in the certification covered here. Gerimantas will also be referring to risk assessments. And if we think about the session we had yesterday, if some of you followed that, that was very much about national level initiatives to document sustainable forest management. And he will be referring back to that, how that feeds into the systems that the actors are using also to show and document the sustainable forest management. Then we will have a forest owner point of view from Mārcis Saklaurs, and I apologize that in the program that is on the website there is a small spelling mistake both in the time and in the Mārcis's surname, so that's been corrected here. Then Aidas will speak about some projects he's been running to make group certification for FSC. Often certification can be a challenge for smaller forest owners, so that would be addressed from an FSC point of view. Then Puneet will continue to give some experiences from the US, working with people in different parts of the world. So we've often seen that there are similarities among very different regions, but of course there are also significant differences. So wanting to give that perspective as well. Then Rolf Forbergen will come in as a sustainability expert. He's been working in some other systems, so also talking about how forest residues, for example, is being seen in those systems and how they've worked with those and defining those. Then after another break, we'll get into the discussion session, and we will again have a forest owner point of view from Aidas. And then we get to the energy producers, and we have Andris Vanax from that is representing an energy producer in the Baltic states, so you could say domestic energy production. And then Sune Balle Hansen from Hofer in Denmark, who represents a more an energy producer importing biomass from the Baltic states. And then discussion and round off. And our moderator today will be Algis. Algis, I will let you present yourself, but just say that you are you're from Lithuania and you're the chairman of the Forest and Landowners Association in Lithuania. So I will hand over, and I should say also that please feel free to write questions and comments in the chat while everybody's talking. here. So we will try to pick up your questions from the chat, and later there will also be an occasion to ask more directly with your cameras and speak up in the discussion session. So Algis, the word is yours now.
Okay, Inge, thank you, and hello all colleagues. It is really a great possibility, but also responsibility to chair today's session. And I would like to say that our debate and this dialogue is going in the right time, as European Commission has presented a communication on new forest strategy up to 2030. It is also very important to say that Fit to 55 package was announced and presented in the mid of the summer. So renewable energy directive, updating LULUCF and all other issues are very important, not only to European Union, but for all our countries and for our region. And high expectation to increase to double renewable energy portion in all our energy consumption, to increase use of wood into construction and renovation sector, combining with the biodiversity requirements and with this international processes raise many questions. And we expect that today we'll have not only presenting some ideas, but also to generate some recommendations on or just ideas what we can recommend to politicians and to both in European level and our national level. And with that aspect, it is very important to have as many speakers from different countries and different continents. And Inge, thank you for collecting all of us here. So maybe I would like just to go to our session and to our debates. And first speaker, it is Liviu Nichiforel from Forest Faculty of Stefan Cel University of Society in Romania. And he will present a topic of forest owners' ownership in Europe and implication for uptake of forest and biomass certification systems. And I would like to introduce a bit this honorable member of our discussion, because Liviu, he holds a master degree in environment governance from Albert Ludwigs University in Freiburg, Germany, and also holds a PhD in forest economics from Stefan Cel University, where he is working recently. Liviu's main research interest refers to analysis of differences in forest governance frameworks across Europe, and his latest national research project proposes the development of a new forest policy framework in Romania. So it is very important and very interesting to listen of your presentation, Liviu. And as you also worked as independent consultant for different projects, including the implementation of forest certification of Romania. So floor is yours, Liviu, and we expect that you will not only present your ideas, but also will keep the time frame, which is very thin of our debate. So floor is yours, Liviu, please.
Just for this introduction. Thank you, Inge, for inviting me to this event. I will try to present an overview of the diversity of the ownership structure across Europe, and approach this also from legality and certification of a system of biomass. And of course, the challenge is to do this in 12 minutes already. I think 1 minute is gone. So when we discuss about forest ownership structure across Europe, we generally discuss about numbers of forest owners, and we discuss about how much are private ownership, how much is public ownership. We do have since 2013 a map that shows the difference in countries in respect to how much is private and how much is public, but we are aware, and EU Forest Strategy is also aware, that these are in many cases estimation. EU estimates like 60 million private forest owners exist in European Union, and the share of private ownership is about 60%. Why this is in many cases estimations is because there are differences in the national statistics. Again, the countries from North and Western Europe, they have more relevant statistics. They know how many forest owners there are, what is the size of the ownership. In some cases, they have even statistic on gender of forest owners, attitudes, behaviors, and expectations. Other countries, like it's in the case of Romania, and I will give some example from the country where I am, we don't know exactly how many forest owners there are. We had the process of forest restitutions, and this is still ongoing. Moreover, the restituted forest has been split between different hairs and is not recorded. So there are differences in statistics in this respect. But I want to point to other factors related to ownership, and these factors may have a significant implication for the provision of forest biomass and ecosystem services. One factor is that we generally speak about public and private owners, but there are different other forms of ownership. And again, at each state level, national level, some of these aspects might be treated different. For example, we discuss about municipal forest. In some cases, these are perceived as public forests. In other countries, these are perceived as private entities. We know that there is an important share of community forest in some countries, and of course this need different policy approaches compared with the pure private forest owner. Moreover, especially from the Western countries, let's say Central Europe and Nordic countries, there are reports that the social characteristic of the forest owners is changing. The share of the so-called urban forest owner or absentee forest owners that are not anymore involved in traditional management is increasing. And this, of course, might have an implication of the wood mobilization and the timber that goes to the market. And this is linked also to the development of new form of ownership, what is defined now the third sector, represented by philanthropic or charitable non-governmental organization that's actually acquire or buy land in order to provide only biodiversity conservation management goals. We heard yesterday that this is the case in Denmark. We have a similar situation in Romania, where conservation Carpathia bought a lot of lands only for biodiversity conservation purposes. So we might face segregation of biodiversity conservation for the classic forest management, or for the integration of biodiversity in forest management, just by this, let's say, voluntary involvement of some NGOs in acquisition of land for these purposes. And there is also a common point across European countries, which is small-scale forest ownership, the fragmentation of forest properties. Again, the countries that have more experience in private property have reacted with different defragmentation policies or inheritance laws. Other countries, like again in Romania, do not have specific policies on how to deal with the fragmentation issues, and small-scale forestry, as we will see also from the certification point of view, it's problematic in providing, let's say, clear forest management goals and long-term forest management goals. But I would like also to point on the fact that there is a diverse regulatory framework existing across Europe. The countries have different approaches in respect to private forest management. We managed to document this by this property rights index in forestry. This is when we convinced 39 forest policy experts across countries. Some of them I've seen are present also in this meeting, and I want to read them. And we look at the legislation in our countries, and we we created an index, and now I think it's more or less clear that there is a division between or a separation between those former socialist countries, more or less remaining in Eastern Europe, Central and Southeastern Europe, that still prefer a strong commitment to governmental norms and regulation in forest management, while countries from Central Europe, North Europe will have a higher emphasis on voluntary and market-based policy instruments in forest management. And the main differentiating factor that we identified in this paper is the management rights. There are different indicators defining management rights. One of these is, for example, the obligation to have a forest management plan. And we see from this table that there are countries, again, former socialist countries, in which forest owners are obliged to have a mandatory forest management plan. In some countries, this is designed by the state. Management plans in this situation act like command and control instruments, or as a stick. Forest owners do not involve in the design of the management plan. They are not allowed to decide, for example, the rotation age, the species that is planted there. While the countries from Western and North Europe, they use forest management plans in case of subsidies or if required by forest certification standard. We see Baltic countries somewhere in between these two separate policy instruments, like mandatory forest management plans as a stick and forest management plans as a voluntary commitment or used in case of subsidies. So we think are facing the same governance dilemma at this moment, even in this EU forest strategy. It's how to deal with the private forest management, is to empower the decision of forest owners and give them more freedom and rely on markets that they will be more efficient, or to use command and control instruments. And these command and control instruments or this kind of regulation are more and more desired, especially from the side of biodiversity conservation and climate purposes. So I was just looking at the text of the EU forest strategy, the new EU forest strategy from this perspective, and we see, or I perceive, that there are many points in which the EU forest strategy asks for more regulations. I will not read everything, but you see regulations strengthening, prohibiting, creating a legally binding instrument for ecosystem restoration, revision of the legislation, developing of a regulatory framework for certified carbon removals, or these are going to increase regulation, and member states are asked to increase the regulations, while the voluntary part and the market part is just related to climate environmental friendly practices and ecosystem services provision, like we see in the text of the EU forest strategy. And also, for the first time, I see clearly in a document stated that there should be a differentiation, a clear differentiation in the objective that the publicly owned forests should commit. We see there that the strategy aims to strengthen forest protection and restoration efforts in publicly owned forests, while for private forest owners and managers, there is envisaged a policy approach based on drivers and financial incentives. And I want to open a discussion more or less for today in what this means if we increase the level of regulation, and what does it mean if we assist today at the diversity of this national regulation from the perspective of enforcement and from the perspective of the free market fairness. First of all, what we see in this moment is that this difference in the national regulatory frameworks means that the legality of a similar forest operation vary largely across Europe, and this is what I meant with the picture. There, we don't speak about different forest ecosystem. If we speak about the management of Norway spruce stands, a picture like you see there might be sustainable forest management and very legal in some countries, while in Romania this might be perceived as an illegality, and it might be perceived, or the forest owner might have to commit to many requirements in order to perform such a cut. And this brings, of course, high administrative and bureaucratic cost in the countries where the regulations are more strict and too many, if it is to say like this. And we have to be aware that higher level of restriction brings also enforcement problems and risks to illegalities. And switching now to certification standards, this has also implication from certification. For example, for the national risk assessment, in the case of Romania, we have identified like more than 13 risks in this control wood standard, just because the bar of the regulation is so high. And we were able to identify different enforcement problems from each of these aspects. That's why the level of risk is higher in the countries where we have more regulations. We tried to document this. So this is a case study for Romania, in which we analyzed the result of the FMFSC reports from 2008 to 2017. We cluster each of these non-conformity identified by the FSC auditors according to the domain in which it was identified, but also we look at it from the perspective of the legality. If the non-conformity was related to a legal issue or if it was related to a voluntary issue. And we found out that 54% of the non-conformities identified in the case of certification in the forest in Romania are related actually to legal issues. And these are mainly referring to the way the harvesting operation takes place, especially health and safety and the impact of harvesting operation are problematic. With two conclusions that we drawn in this paper. First of all, higher regulation do not necessarily guarantee sustainable forest management, and especially if you have governmental enforcement failures, then it's rather a very risky environment for forest owners and forest operators. And on the other side, we see, and I can prove from my experience also in the certification system, that certification has contributed a lot to improving of the situation also for the legal requirements of health and safety, and the quality of the harvesting operation have improved in Romania just with the effort of the forest certification. We did try to upscale this also at the European level. Bogdan, my colleague, has created a database from 9 countries with all the non-conformities from the same period. I point here trying to also cluster the situation between former socialist countries and the rest of the countries. What you see here on the right are the top 20 issues identified in these non-conformities. While we see here it's just health and safety, or these social issues are more problematic in Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, so in former socialist countries, while for Sweden, for example, we see that most of the identified problems are related to high conservation value forest, preserving of representative ecosystems, so are related to environmental issues. We wanted also to identify the connection between these non-conformities and the legality status. And this is another point of discussion. It was possible to do this also mostly for the former socialist countries, in which the reports were stating more or less clearly if this is infringement of legal requirement or a voluntary requirement. In many reports, this is not clear. It was impossible for us for 54% of the non-conformities without asking a national expert to see if this is related to a legal issue or to a voluntary issue. And this might be a point to be taken by the certification schemes in discussion, especially that we see EU forest strategy requires minimum standards for transparency. Coming to the conclusions and points of discussion, more or less, my perspective by looking at the EU forest strategy is that we see a trend to a more uniform distribution of the regulatory framework. The term uniform, it's debated, but we see an increased demand for more regulatory frameworks applied at the national level. Yes, there is a discussion about the financial instruments promoted by the EU forest strategy. We don't know for the moment how uniform will be distributed also this in respect to the cost benefits that private forest owners have to support in different regulatory framework. We hope from the Romanian perspective that there will be also such a more uniform distribution of the EU financial support in this respect. On the other side, if we see subsidies, if we see increased regulation, of course we have to ask what's the role of the markets and how market signals will be used by private forest owners if they are directed by regulation and by the financial mechanism, because the bioeconomy should work by market mechanism if it is to rely on the bioeconomy strategy. And in the end, of course, we have to consider and to do more research in this diversity of forest ownership types and to see which policy instruments will work better for different ownership types. And to try to identify future scenarios on how the market will look like if there will be this clear distinction between public and private forests in terms of management goals and policy approaches. And these are open points for discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Liviu. It was really a very interesting presentation and many thoughts. I do not see any questions yet by participants in chat, so we have 2 minutes for the discussion. Could you ask your estimation, how you see a proposal in European forest communication regarding forest strategy about additional forest certification on close to nature forest management? Have you analyzed this, and what is your opinion, if any?
Yeah, I did not analyze in details, but the fact that the EU proposes a voluntary certification schemes for close to nature might have, of course, good aspects for the countries where, again, I'm thinking from the perspective of Romania, we have imposed management rules for close to nature forestry. So it might be much easier for Romanian forest owners to cope with the requirements of such a certification standard. And then Romanian forest owner might prove better on the market that they cope with the requirements of close to nature. Of course, this will be much more difficult for those forest owners that do not live in an environment where close to nature forestry has been implemented for a long time, like in the case of Romania, and then they have to do additional work and to change actually drastically the management, the current management, in order to be able to be certified under such a scheme. So again, what I pointed that there is this diversity of regulation might be perceived different from forest owners from different countries. If it is to think from the Romanian perspective, this might be an advantage for some Romanian forest owners, but clearly might be a disadvantage for other forest owners from other countries.
Okay, Liviu, thank you very much. Time is running, and hopefully audience will ask in chat about your proposed new framework for forest policy in Romania, and you can answer to that. But now we'll turn now to Roman Polyachenko. assurance manager from Sustainable Biomass Program, and his topic is sustainability requirements for the Renewable Energy Directive 2 and incorporation into the CBP certification scheme. And just introduce briefly Roman. So he's insurance management in this Sustainable Biomass Program, which this program he joined just 1 year ago in April 2020 as assurance manager to oversee and manage program global operation assurance system. Before that, he works for 12 years as certification body NAPCON as supply chain integrity program manager. And Roman is really experienced. Is a forestry professional with international experience within the forestry and timber sector, environmental auditing, assurance systems, and trading and delivery. So as an auditor and manager, he works with many different wood processing, biomass, and paper companies in different parts of the world. And such rich experience, including leading a project, developing a training programs, organizing workshops, writing technical handbooks, building assurance procedures, supporting quality management, and supervising teams of technical specialists audits, create a really huge and a very rich experience from Roman. So Roman, floor is yours, and we're expecting from you to hear much interesting things. So please.
Thanks, Algis. I didn't expect that you will read this bio which I submitted. Otherwise, I would submit something shorter. But hello, everyone, webinar participants. My name is Roman. I'm representative Sustainable Biomass Program, and I was asked to basically tell a little bit the perspective of certification scheme regarding use and certification of biomass, and also what is our plan regarding recognition against RED II directive. So before I start talking about RED II and how did we apply and what are the progress with that and what were the challenges, I will probably first say a few words about the certification scheme we have, because not all of them may know it, and I think it's very important for then proceeding with the challenges. So SBP scheme is an independent non-for-profit certification scheme. If you're familiar with FSC, PFC schemes, then the setup and the structure of the organization is kind of similar. It has been specifically developed for woody biomass used in large-scale industrial heat and power production. So you may know that there is also a residential market. There are those small bags of pellets being sold in supermarkets. So our scheme is not working with residential market, but by industrial market, industrial scale. So in our system, the feedstock sourced from legal and sustainable sources can be used for production of sustainable biomass. And kind of the objective of this scheme is that heat and power producers, we call them end users, mostly in Europe currently, use our certification to demonstrate compliance with national legality and sustainability requirements for woody biomass. So in the next slide, I'll also explain why it's important and how we differ from other certification schemes. We do have a system of independent auditing, third-party certification. We have 5 certification bodies and ASI accreditation body overseeing their work. So a little bit about statistics, because it's also important to show like our role in all this. So we currently have 342 certificate holders. Most of them are biomass producers, so wood chip or pellet producers. Those are located not just in Europe, but quite big ones actually based in North America, Canada, US. We have quite many in Russia, in non-EU countries like Belarus, and there are also some producers in other parts of the world, including some Asian countries. It's very important to maybe mention that approximately 77% of EU industrial pellet market is certified against our scheme, which is quite a big share, as you can imagine. And approximately 1/4 of worldwide pellet production is also certified. We expect, of course, that besides EU, there will be new markets joining this sustainable biomass requirements, regulations, and we will expand our markets. So then the scheme, the benefits of having an SBP scheme is that we have one standard, so-called like meta standard, which includes different regulatory requirements. So the current challenge, one of the challenges is that different countries in Europe, they have different regulatory requirements regarding sustainability. These can differ not kind of a lot, but in a significant manner that you cannot just have one standard. So we have a standard where there is base level of compliance, and then there are like add-ons or modules to meet regulatory requirements of different markets. Currently, we do work mostly with end markets in Belgium, Netherlands, Denmark, and UK. So these are the markets where biomass is used quite extensively and where there are quite strong regulatory requirements, sustainability requirements for that. We also work with FSC and PFC claims. So SBP system currently recognizes these certification claims to avoid redundancy. But since those claims, they are not having full recognition from some of the European countries, specifically when it comes to biomass. In certain kind of, there are certain limitations, or there is like no certain functionality in those schemes. Then our scheme, besides sustainability, also provides mechanism for collection and transfer of energy data through the supply chain, enabling end users to calculate greenhouse gas emissions in the end. So again, the whole point of the certification system here is like to avoid multiple audits of kind of, you know, different biomass producers against different requirements. Instead, creating the system where the claim can be passed through the supply chain, and that makes life of end users much easier. So maybe I jump over. You will have those slides in the end. You can check about the scheme. But I will jump directly into the RED 2. So I will not kind of start telling you what RED 2 is. I mean, it's like a European Union directive, which includes certain additional sustainability criteria for biomass, which includes then sustainable harvest and LULUCF, and as well as certain thresholds for greenhouse gas emission savings. So in order to participate, to receive subsidies, to participate in the emission trading system, you need to, in the future, you need to basically be able to comply with certain regulations. And our system wasn't kind of initially designed to meet the requirements of RED 2, for example. So as RED 2 is becoming more and more important, then last year, approximately in October, we have applied for the recognition. In the RED 2 system, there are possibility to recognize voluntary schemes. So again, like taking a step back, member states, they need to adopt the directive into their national legislation, and there are different ways how to comply with these rules. One of the kind of effective methods to comply with these rules is to recognize voluntary schemes. And then again, the member states won't need to develop their own kind of specific type of inspections or kind of auditing procedures. They can rely on those schemes. So if they will receive a certain scheme claim, they will be kind of confident that this is compliant with RED 2. There are certain challenges and currently obstacles on the way of our recognition. Those include the fact that implementing acts were delayed. So it was planned that they will be published I think in January this year. We are now in October, and those implementing acts are not yet published, and we are expecting them to come in the coming months, basically. So the latest we have seen, it was I think it was November where they will be published. So that is delayed, and of course, not all EU member states have transposed RED 2 into the national laws. We are aware only of several countries. So I think it's Denmark and France who have fully kind of transposed RED 2 into their national law, and other countries haven't. Another complexity is that there, as you may know, the RED 3 is being consulted on. So before we have fully implemented RED 2, there's already discussions about RED 3, and I will mention that in the next slides a little bit. Regarding the progress with that for SBP scheme, is that we are expecting that in coming months we will obtain the technical approval recognition against RED 2 from the European Commission, and that will allow those biomass producers who are certified against SBP scheme to make special claims, special SBP claims on their material, on their biomass, which will be also compliant with RED 2, and that will help those end users in the end markets where regulators will start asking for evidence against RED 2 to demonstrate that. We, of course, go like more like to challenges. So what are the challenges for our scheme? And perhaps that would be a very similar situation for other schemes like FSC and PSC, because like our schemes, they have been operating for several years. They are globally applicable schemes. So we are not just meeting requirements of EU market, but also other different markets from different countries. So that's why it's kind of always challenging to fully kind of just revise the system because of one regulation, because of RED 2, even though this is like quite significant regulation. What is what is another challenge is that we need to ensure continuation of our recognition by regulators in UK, Denmark, Netherlands, and Belgium. So we cannot mess up with that. We cannot like make changes in our scheme which will not be accepted in those markets. And of course, like one of the kind of challenges for us is that we haven't been recognized for RED 1. We are only recognized for the first time, and that's why it takes a little bit more time. So frankly, our scheme is probably, when it comes to wood biomass, is one of the most sophisticated schemes because it has quite state-of-art systems for online monitoring, for registering transactions online, for online auditing, and it takes some time for the European Commission to understand the scheme and make their final assessment. So how are we going in the future regarding RED 2, and in general, how do we address this kind of situations? We do have our baseline standard, SBP standard, which is already quite significant level of requirements. And then as we will, I think like going forward, there will still be differences between different markets regarding their expectations and requirements. So our system works that we have a modular approach where we have like the baseline standard, and then we have additional modules or add-on requirements. If you want to sell, for example, to Flanders, then to Belgium, then you need to comply with a little bit different requirements. RED 2, for example, they may not be happy to receive certain types of feedstock. So for example, I think they entirely exclude stem wood from their sourcing, which is allowed. So same approach we will be using for RED 2, and currently the system is being finalized. Soon in coming months, as I said, it will be published for all participants to use, probably go through the scope change audits of their certificates, and they will basically add this additional add-on module documents to be able to, on top of SBP claim, to also make RED 2 claim. That will be our technical approval, and I should have mentioned that none of the certification schemes have received official approval from the European Commission yet, which is quite unfortunate because directive became effective already in July. So I think we're expecting that schemes will start getting full approval recognition probably towards the end of this year. Yeah, so all right, maybe a few words. Again, I think for those interested in the scheme, there are going to be some communication updates regarding RED 2 recognition in coming months, as I said. There will be a number of webinars, trainings for certificate holders and CBs, where they can learn how to add this to their scope. And SBP system, by using risk-based approach, it actually makes it easier for forest owners that they don't currently need to certify their forest. They can work with biomass producers by supplying them certain kind of evidence of compliance. So through the risk-based approach, they have been assessed against certain sustainability requirements.
So can you summarize, Roman?
Yeah, I mean, a few words about going just forward. I mean, we have provided comments to the Fit for 55 policy and also to the forest policy and strategy. And we think that what is important as a scheme is that bad biomass practices are eliminated from the market. Certain not kind of unsustainable practices should not be accepted. And certification schemes, I think, could play quite a key role in that by providing the mechanism for private forest owners, biomass producers, and end users how to comply with those regulations. Because if everyone start doing their own thing, every member state start doing their own procedures and processes, that will create perhaps too much bureaucracy and too much costs. Yes. That's it. I mean, if if you have any questions regarding the scheme or regarding our implementation of those requirements, you should contact us directly, or we also welcome everyone to sign up and become a member of SBP stakeholder advisory group, where you can participate in regular meetings and receive those technical updates quicker and directly.
Okay, Roman. Yes, thank you very much. Your presentation was really interesting, and you already received several questions, so maybe you can answer them in chat, or then we can debate on a discussion part about that. And we now slightly switch to the Mikhel Jugaste presentation. He is a head of quality and certification system of well-known Estonian company Granule Invest. And his presentation title is Managing and Demonstration Sustainability as a Wood Pellet Producer in the Baltics. So Mikhel, floor is yours, and we're expecting a very interesting presentation from you. So please.
Okay, well, thank you for the introduction. Sorry, I'm a bit under the weather today, so bear with me if I'm slow or sound weird, but yeah, I'll do my best to meet your sort of expectations of my presentation. So I'm here to talk about managing and demonstrating sustainability as a wood pellet producer in the Baltics. Just a few words about myself. I am in charge of quality and certification systems in the company, which pretty much means that all the topics that are discussed throughout these workshops in one way or another I deal with. My background is civil engineering turned environmental management turned basically a quality manager. So Granule Invest. We have 12 production units. Actually, one is in Texas, others are in the Baltics, but all 12 production units are required to meet the same criteria of the same markets. Well, this means we have 4 different countries with very, very different supply chains to manage and somehow still meet all the criteria of the markets. And more interestingly or uniquely, we also have 6 biomass combined heat and power plants, which means we are a biomass producer having to meet all the regulatory requirements for, say, RED 2 and RED 3, and also our CHPs that produce our electricity and heat for the pellet plants and the local grid now fall under the 20 megawatt threshold, therefore the sustainability criteria of the RED 2 plus and 3. So effectively what's happening now is that the lowest value industry in the, let's say, wood industry and forestry industry, which is the biomass industry, has to effectively lead and expand the scope and strengthen the sustainability of higher value industries. That is because woodworking industries don't really have that level of regulatory requirements today. All the strategies are moving towards that, but the bioenergy industry is the only one who actually has to comply with those requirements today to stay in the market and stay above the regulatory requirements. So in a way, we have to sort of convince, teach, and pursue the upstream higher value industries to also provide data or do the procedures required by our market, which is totally doesn't make sense, and it's the other way around. On top of that, we as a bioenergy company have to reach above what is the normal sort of sustainable supply chain threshold. Showing on the graph here, we have to go beyond the gate level checks and the supply chain checks to actually the transportation chain, logistics, and use efficiency, as well as in emissions. So it's quite a massive expand of scope. Just to pause here, this workshop, and I'm going to mainly focus on the sustainability requirements of responsible forestry and supply chain traceability, but I would like to remind that sustainable biomass and bioenergy extends further than this. I think half of the majority time today we put on production level environmental performance, energy, heat source efficiency, health and safety, anti-corruption, and social aspects of that. And so I must say sustainability these days is not limited to sustainable forestry, all the supply chain. So how to manage? Well, one important thing is we pre-screen suppliers and supply areas that have easiest possible compliance. So we have to start with them who give us the higher chance of compliance with the minimum effort. Combine commercial talks with sustainability talks so that the restrictions would be understood on the highest management levels, because commercial talks, if they don't include the restrictions, there will be a lot of disputes afterwards if the restrictions come. We have made gate level restrictions or post-harvest field visits checks the absolute last option for risk mitigation, because it's the most time consuming and you have to basically send out your specialists for one load of biomass, which if you accept the tens of thousands of them is not a really reasonable thing to do. So therefore, everything you can screen, you have to do it before. We therefore work on solutions that work for all and meet all of the necessary requirements and avoid exceptions and bespoke solutions. Because again, exceptions take extra time, but what you want to do is accept the maximum amount with least amount of heavy work or follow-ups. And most importantly, maybe we make use of the already put in place procedures of the woodworking industries and make use of those and build on those. And we do not try to implement our own into their value chains or supply chains, because that's impossible. So how to manage technically? We manage every single load with a 3D scanner system called LoadMon, because it's paperless. It measures the biomass while the truck moves through the gate. We have made all waybills electronic and in the exact same format to speed up, tidy up the data flow. So this also means that before this, every truck had 3 copies of waybills, which is turns out to be a similar amount of paper as we produce pellets, but now that all is behind us. So certification, validity, typos, feedstock groups, everything you would check on a waybill and you have to verify is actually checked by a computer, and all the mismatches are highlighted to the operator for human double checking. Also, HEVs, sort of no-go area screening is done with electronic maps. The gate system automatically checks any overlaps. And this is also very important for material or resource efficiencies. We screen on a sub-compartment level. So if you start rejecting HCV overlaps on FMU level, then you will lose a lot of material and have a lot of unhappy suppliers because the restriction might have only been on 2 subcompartments out of 20. And we also have 12 plants that keep all their production figures in the same format, in the same software, which is accessible wherever you are in the world. This sort of helps auditing and evidence collection and presenting quite a lot. So how to demonstrate all this? Because I on high level showed what the sort of principles are behind managing and collecting. So demonstration, just to put into the main categories where the auditors focus on and all the regulatory requirements focus on, electronic waybills. So we have up to 100,000 rows of data per plant, which has to be checked for compliance. This is collected in the software. It's filterable through whatever time, volume, FMU size, feedstock, travel distance, transportation type, all the information you need for reporting. You just choose the period, filter, and you have a report, evidence equivalent report in seconds. We have a HCV mitigation log. Also, all FMUs that need additional checks or evidence can be accessed, filtered, or imported for the audit purposes. With the mitigation evidence, the field reports, the checks that was done, or the reasons for accepting is linked to that waybill. And the waybill has a button which you click on, it opens the map. So very, very efficient, very quick, but the only way we can manage. Also, the same goes for energy and field use, where we can do daily, weekly, quarterly, even equipment level, plant level, quantity level reports within seconds in 1 liter, 10 kilogram or kilowatt accuracy. These are all linked with hard evidence. So whatever the auditor chooses to see, we can trace that down to the invoice or sort of volume check. The same goes for health and safety, where actually, if you have 12 plants across the world, then keeping a sort of constant record and evidence and measuring or performance measuring is quite a difficult thing to do on paper or only with site visits. So we have developed an application here as well, where all accidents, housekeeping mishaps, leakages, damages, personal protection issues are recorded, and each corrective action is traced in the system and reminders are sent to the responsibles. This pairs the findings with the employee numbers and gives a sort of constant KPI of each pellet production unit. And we know where to focus on for corrective actions. Risk-based approach. I'm not going to talk about the risk-based approach that Gerimantas will step on, but it's also important to apply a risk-based approach when you do evidence collection, meaning you ask less data and details for lower risk sources and feedstock, for example, certified feedstocks, and you focus on the sort of uncertified forest for the more higher evidence flows. Same goes for efficiency checks. You double check on the equipment that uses diesel, not the equipment that uses renewable energy already and is highly effective.
Okay, Mikhel, can you summarize a bit? Oh, concluding, okay.
Concluding remarks. Biomass producers should not aim to change the forest and woodworking industry. Sustainability compliance can be only effectively managed if they can demonstrate key evidence in a digital way. Since we have 3-4 audits per year, it's impossible to comply otherwise or facilitate these audits. And it maybe the last point is that it is vital to commit to a certification system that meets regulatory requirements and focuses on the whole value chain, because other systems will provide some marketing value at best, but no stability or field level improvements in performance, that being on the forest, a production unit, or logistics side. So yeah, sorry for going over time. Thank you.
No, but thank you very much. It was most interesting. But we reaching a time for first break of 10 minutes. So I think that we will have a possibility to debate those issues which you just raised. And now, Inge, I think that we should announce a break in 10 minutes and we'll meet 3:10 Eastern European time. And see you after 10 minutes. So, okay, colleagues, so time is already to continue with our discussion. And the next speaker, it is Gerimantas Gaigala, Forestry Director for Europe and Russia from Preferred by Nature. And just briefly to introduce Gerimantas' topic, it is auditing experience from biomass and forest certifications in the Baltic countries, solutions and challenges. Gerimantas is experienced forester, also has education in law and in programming, working in different positions, starting with the Ministry of Environment in the Department of International Relations and Agreement Division, and also working in different international organizations. So Gerimanta, it is really, we expect very interesting presentation from your side. Please, floor is yours, and we would like to use more time for your presentation and later debates. So please.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear.
Yes.
I initially prepared the presentation for 5 minutes, so I was granted more. So I hope I will not take all the time. But anyway, just briefly, as Algis told, I'm working in Preferred by Nature, and briefly about our organization as international not-profit organization, and we are engaging in different services and having experienced more than 25 years. We are working in almost all continents, almost basic countries, having about 270 full-time staff in 30 countries and 40 nationalities. And just for your note that, of course, we are talking about certification, about the forestry, but actually we engage in much more commodities like agriculture, tourism, biomass, rice, oil palm, and others. For other commodities, we are exploring the possibilities to be engaged. So here about the certification services, we are having our service in more than 100 countries distributed among the whole world, and we are certified more than 80 million hectares of forest. As we are coming back to you see here the services, certification services we provide, and now we are focusing on SBP certification scheme, and we were the first accredited according to the certification scheme. So we have the experience on that and having our opinion and results during this period. Just briefly about the Baltic countries, as you see in numbers, there is not so many certificates in one aspect, but of course, in biggest amount is in Latvia, in Estonia, and in Lithuania. So basically, just of course, I don't want to get more deeply in certification process, but basically here is the steps for certification, where it could be started by pre-assessment, which is optional in order for the client to evaluate their possible gaps according to SBP system, but it is optional. The basic question is the preparation, where the client should define for himself the supply chain. And of course, there are some clients who has the very simple supply chain and others more complicated, including several countries and covering not only certified resources, but uncertified resources. And here, I think, is the main point or the main question, which comes, of course, when the client needs more resources, of course, he keen to engage and have supply based in bigger area, But of course, if you want to include non-certified forest, it should go through other standards, and for clients sometimes it's more headache and the process is more complicated and much longer. For our side is basic is document review and on-site evaluation, which is not different from other schemes, except that if client chooses to have the in supply chain non-certified forest, which shall go through the risk-based approach, it much more work for us to evaluate effectiveness of their mitigation measures. And I will come next on the topic. Here, of course, is the simple supply scheme, which according to SBP, let's say if the customer supplies FSC, PFC, SBP recognized schemes, primary material, secondary material, or the tertiary material is quite simple, and there are not so many questions. Discussions goes further when we are talking about non-certified forest. And of course, from the private forest owner's point of view, here is the bigger area where it could supply sustainable biomass. But this sustainable biomass should be evaluated according to the country risk assessment, which conducted for Estonia, for Latvia, Lithuania. And most of the indicators are assigned as the low risk, except some specific risk or indicators which shall undergo risk mitigation measures. And here, where the real problems or impact to environment or impact to the resources and time of the client and for the auditing comes. So here, I just wanted to show the graphic. In the blue, you see the number of certificates where the supply-based evaluation is included, which means that here some biomass could come from uncertified private forest. And as you see, for let's say in Estonia, it's quite a substantial amount and bigger amount than comparing with Lithuania. And of course, there are reasons behind which probably first related to the market and to the necessity to have bigger supply. The other aspects that probably in Estonia, the specified indicators which needs the risk mitigation measure is more simple than, for example, in Latvia or Lithuania. And here comes the real headache or the real issue, and based on the whole picture, we can analyze the common problems. The specified risk, or let's say common for all three countries, is related to woodland key habitat protection, and in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And the mitigation measures, of course, depends on the availability of digital resources or online database where woodland key habitat are inventorized and can be easily checked or not. But later I will maybe talk more specifically. The other specified risk belongs to Latvia, which is also related to the high conservation value forest, but here basically is included high conservation value forest category 1, 3, and 6, which means woodland key habitat, some nest of red species, and cultural and historical heritage in the forest. And the third specified risk, common to only to Lithuania and Latvia, is the health and safety of forest workers in private forest. It's not in Estonia, but the main reason that Estonia is most of the work is done by machinery. Still in Lithuania, Latvia, is there other type of work, chainsaws, and here the risk of health and safety is quite high. So basically, the main issue is how to address client perspective this risk, how to mitigate, and for our perspective is how to evaluate effectiveness of their measures. And here just, of course, the graphic maybe doesn't show much valuable information here, but I just wanted to highlight during our certification period, the most common issue identified on the customer level is the problems related to the identification of the place of harvesting, which is the crucial issues. In order to mitigate the risk, you have to know the origin of the wood. So when the wood comes directly from forest, there is not the big issue, but when it comes to some traders or processing units, then it would be the problem. And coming to the end, some challenges and solutions. Of course, during the certification practice, we faced the problem about the stakeholders consultation credibility. Stakeholders consultation sometimes becoming not so credible because some are contacted several times by other schemes, by FSC control wood schemes, others contacted by CBs and by clients, and not all of them, they are quite valuable. I think the proper involvement in the process of targeted stakeholders is the most important, because we realize that bigger or high value stakeholders, which covers more national, regional level, contribute to this much more. The other issue is the poor involvement of small-scale private forest owners in supplying sustainable biomass. And the possible solution is we find that FSC group certification proved to be quite efficient when small private forest owners through group certification can supply sustainable biomass. But of course, if not through certification, then we see that cooperation of state institutions and different stakeholders for creation and making accessible some centralized resources like databases on high conservation value forest. Let's say state institutions could in more centralized way to make inventories and availability of results to the public, and to use these tools to minimize this risk mitigation measures. And the other is, of course, the process of certification. It's quite long, expensive for client, for CB, and we notice that it is some kind of cooperation among the schemes where, let's say, the FSC control wood risk basically in most cases matches the SBP risk and be done at the same time. And of course, the same issue that some digital resources and tools, when they are available, in certain cases we see in Estonia, in other cases in other countries, it helps to minimize the resources and to use most of the time evaluating online information than going on site and spending time. So I see that my time is over, but yes, basically this is most of the challenges related to certification.
Okay, Gerimantas, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. And even if you said that have been prepared for 5 minutes, it was just in time for a longer presentation, and hope that during the discussion we can elaborate a bit on questions and this actual issues you have touched on. But maybe now we should turn to private owners' perspective. As Mārcis Saklaurs from Latvian Forest Owners Cooperative Mežsaimnieks will speak about sustainable private forestry in Latvia. And this Forest Owners Cooperative, it is really well running and have a serious impact in the managing of the private forest in Latvia. So Mārcis, are you ready to make a presentation already?
Take my time. So today I'm really shortly I will explain from as a forest owner, from such point, explain how we do the forest management in Latvia. It's not a story for the small owners, but a little bit bigger ones, or middle-sized forest owners, and the one of them are forest cooperatives, where I'm member of the board. We joined together, not yet, but close to 1,000 owners in Latvia. There are different kind of them, Latvians and other foreigners also there are, but basically they are the small size forest owners. As you see, then in average they are 19 hectares per every owner. In total, it's 16,000 hectares we manage in a daily. The last year we had a turnover 7 million, and that's most important. And we were planting 1.13 million new trees in our land. That I would like to say then we are not telling that we are foresters. The real forester is which is not thinking only about the logging where the money is coming, but also for silviculture activities. And this part of our job is more than half what we are doing every day to plant, to prepare the soil and to thin and do such things like that. So, but in Latvia, it is like the half of the forest is owned by state and the other half is owned by private. In the right side, you see the latest data from this is story about how the big companies consolidate the small properties and making the portfolio, like the folder of the properties, the bigger, and only several of them in top 100 are or in top 50 are with the Latvian capital. They are Swedish pulp mill, pulp producers, and the other investors, and etc. And but from size of the owner, I mean there are the big ones, but the medium size, like in average, the size of the property are smaller. It means something around 8 to 9 hectares is an average. But some owners has 2 properties, more and more properties. So basically, in the middle there are something some 10 to 50 hectares is this main part. What normally some owners has it. In Latvia, in total, we have more than 100,000 forest owners. But as you see in the graph, there are a lot of them who has less than 5 hectares. That means they have something around some house or somewhere that are not so important for industry, but yeah, they are in the numbers. So, but how we do that one? And for sustainable forest management in a daily practice, we need to follow some steps. And the first of all is national legislation and also EU legislation. What means we have taken in account, and a lot of areas in Latvia are under the Natura 2000, and basically from forest owner point, they are commercial or productive forests, which are not like in Sweden or Slovenia where are the mountains and so on put in the Natura 2000, but there are, if here is some area in forest, then this is a productive forest means. But this is the first step what we have to follow it. And yeah, the second one is certification, and basically all of professional forest owners has FSC chain of the custody certificate. In other way, it's impossible to work in the market and sell any trees. Some of them has also forest management certificate, but not the main part. Also, some of them have a PFC, and by the way, we don't have a SBP certificate, but some of bigger buyers, like already pellet producers, told us then they have this one, and we need to follow their rules. So even if we don't have it, we have to accept and work with them together and follow what they are asking. The third thing is what I already touched is then the forest management doesn't mean just only the logging, like some of business person think it, but it's also then it's a lot of means to do in a silvicultural things like improve planting material, pre-commercial thinning, and follow different kind of hazards, things like that. I wrote here like to plant the mixed forests and reduce the risks. I mean, we also plant like in Sweden spruce and a lot of spruce, but like in property level, there are some stands, spruce stands, some stands are pine, some are birch, and in the property level, there are mixed forests together. So reduce the risks from different points, from the economical point or from the nature hazards and so on. The one more point, as we professional owners, we are listening what scientists are telling us, and during this like time when we talk a lot about the climate changes and how we can protect our forest in future, these points and knowledge which come from the scientists is really important for us. And in my practice, I know every month or once per 2 months, we are talking with the scientists and getting the newest knowledge and try improving our forest management. So this is really important step also for future. So the one more point is then, as professional owners, we're looking really serious on the infrastructure because, as I already told, half of our forests are owned by state and other half is owned by private. The state forest company can use a lot of investments and rebuild the roads and build the new ones, or invest money in drainage system. But in private forestry, it's a lot of different owners around, and it's really hard to say, okay, let's invest some amount of money and let's build a road. This is really hard, but in some cases it's already happened. I hope it will be more and more, but at least, for example, the maintenance of already existed drainage systems, this is really important, and the professional forest owners are starting to think more and more in our forests. And the last step, what I want to point out, is a learning. As myself, I'm doing my own workshops, for example, and once per 2 months, I'm doing the online knowledge training for the forest owners, and sometimes they join 100, 150 owners, and then we are discussing the problems that comes up and forest beetles, so on, and we try to not to solve, but to get clear answers where to go and how to manage our forests. So that's the points what I would like to show. And as our topic is more concentrating about the biomass, I want to point out where we get it. And in professionally and economically based forestry, also including the nature things and nature conservation, we are, when we are going for logging activities, or at the beginning when we plant a forest and we try to grow up the best type or best value forest, we want to see there the saw logs and the veneer logs, which are most valuable. And also when we do a cutting, we cut them. I hope in every country we are doing the same, at least in the Europe. And then when I give a task for a contractor who has a harvesters, I say them then the next is lower quality saw logs, the cheaper ones, and if it's not fit, then cut in a pulpwood. And then the last step is to cut for the firewood. So okay, so the answer, the firewood from the total cutting amount is probably something around 5%. I was checking some projects, and in some projects are 2%, and some is 7%, but totally something around 4% per one project is firewood. Which if we are doing basically from the bushes, treetops, branches, and what is not used for for sawmills or pulp mills. And the biomass, like wood chips, we are producing basically at the roadsides or really close to them, where are suitable soils, because a lot of owners are taking care of the soil, and they're looking for next forest, what's going on there. And if there is not suitable logging conditions, then they use the branches and so on for making the logging roads and leave the branches in the forest and not to sell for the biomass. So that's where we get the biomass. Also about the documentation, really shortly, as I told, all of us are, or all of us has already FSC certificate, chain of the custody. Then we need a cutting permission issued by state. Also, we have to show the rights of cutting in some cases, like farmers has a forest and he wants to sell it, then we have to show all this chain of the custody for the buyer, like granite, pellet factory, or etc. And also we have to show the evidence then we are saving the biotopes, like nature data system was also, which is managed by Nature Conservation Agency, has, I think there are all of our biotopes in Latvia, like past 4 years, the amazing inventory was done, and before any cutting, when we are going, we are checking that this data system say if there is some biotope or not. And yeah, that's it. And also we need to follow the other national requirements, like we need contracts and all the contractors. So it's really shortly, but I hope you something to get it about how we do, like from practical perspective, the forest management in Latvia.
Yeah. Thank you, Mārcis. You are good in timing, and it was a really interesting presentation from forest owners' perspective. Compliments when you see that only 5% from your production is going as a firewood, so it is a very efficient assortment management here. And look to the chat where the audience putting questions, and I think that we'll move discussion to our panel discussion part, because now it is Aidas Pivoriūnas' turn. And Aidas, it is a well-known expert in Lithuania. He is going to present a topic of development of FSC system among stakeholders in the Baltic countries, and Aidas is really experienced in that, as he was responsible for development of the FSC national standard in Lithuania. He is a project and stakeholder engagement manager for Baltic states at Forest Stewardship Council, director of the Forest Owners Association in Lithuania, and private forest management consultant. So Aidas, floor is yours, and we are really expecting from you to hear very interesting presentation. So please.
Thank you very much, my dear colleague Algis. Good day, everyone. Tere, labdien, sveiki visi. So shortly, I will introduce the very recent developments of FSC among smallholders. And smallholders is a term that is used within FSC. In the academic circles, it's non-industrial private forest owners, or smaller than industrial private forest owners. So these terms are the same. It is true to say, or to start up with the point that previously FSC has been far away from the private forests, and in the global strategy, the previous one, there has been a goal set to focus on small private forest owners, to expand, to help, to improve, to raise value of private forests. And that was the global pattern. FSC has been putting a lot of efforts to start to initiate, to reach out the private forestries. And one of the regions is Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Yeah, so it's a small picture describing, as Algis was saying, that we have been quite heavily involved in designing the national standard for forest stewardship. So these are private forest owners in the field testing phase of a design. Let's now move to some of the specific countries, some facts and figures. In Lithuania, we have currently 3 group certificates. And it started in 2017 with almost 0 hectares. Now it's over 100. And in general, in Lithuania, the growth is that at least FSC certified private forests cover something around 20% of all private forests. We do also have several individual certificate holders, and the biggest one is an investment company that owns a bit more than 40,000 hectares. That is not definitely a smallholder. And in Lithuania, since this year, the national standard is implemented. That means that all the previous FSC standards that have been developed by certification bodies are removed, and we have one standard. Smallholders have to follow the requirements of this standard, and there are some specific indicators that say that specific indicators are not required to be followed by smallholders. If we move to Latvia, we have a bit different picture that is quite natural. The number of hectares of smallholders covered under the FSC is bigger, but that is due to the fact that FSC has much longer presence in our neighboring country. It has also more groups, although with less memberships, and that is one of the reasons is that in average Latvia has 3 times bigger average private forest holdings. So that is one of the reasons. Another reason is that there are more investment companies who act as private forest owners in Latvia. In Latvia, there is also an undergoing process of designing the interim national forest stewardship standard, and it is believed that it will be in force from next year. Now it is in the provision of management of Forest Stewardship Council in Bonn, and it could be that it will be approved in December later this year. This means that the existing now and heavily used 4 FSC interim standards in Latvia developed by certification bodies will be lasting for 1 extra year. Let's move to Estonia. Estonia has 4 groups, also a big number of membership, and more or less the same kind of pattern of development as in other countries. And it has a bit unclear situation what will happen with the development of national standard that will affect the FSC's development among private forestries. The national standard has been developed by the Standard Development Group, Now it has been advised that it should be revised, and the indigenous peoples principle number 3, according to FSC requirements, should be installed. That is undergone now by FSC itself. This process might end up not with a national standard for Estonia, but rather with the FSC's interim standard, if the standard development group will not approve the proposals coming from FSC. Yeah. Few bullet points as takeaways from the experience in establishing the group certification schemes in Lithuania and Latvia is that if you are focusing on best practice forest management, sustainable forest management, it is working. It is very important not to mix politics. So some people say that certification process is the market-driven process. So I would say it might be all of the processes, but politics. So we should avoid doing politics out of certification, and in general out of forest management. What we could see also is that there is an increasing market demand for FSC products, so that is helping to be attractive for smallholders. And there are three main topics of area where FSC is focusing its attention when setting the requirements. This is labor, communities, and high conservation values. That might be cultural or environmental values that are met in the forests. My last slide. There is a global strategy set for next 5 years, and among other focuses, one of the main focus still will be smallholders. So FSC will be very active in this area. If you have any questions, we could take it right now in the chat box or in the panel discussion. I would be very grateful. Thank you.
Yes. So Aidas, as we have still some time left, it is from Kate a question: what are differences for the forest owners and supply chain managers regarding FSC interim standard versus national forest certification standard for FSC?
Okay, that's a good question. The main principle, the national standard and interim standard, is that the national standards are usually developed by standard development groups, and it is only the group, standard development group, that had a right to remove the basic indicators or even sometimes a criteria set by FSC. When the interim standard is developed, usually the basic indicators set by FSC are still in place. So I would say that national standards are more likely to be designed for the local needs, for the local status quo of forests, demographic situation, etc.
Okay, thank you, Aidas, very much. And it was already discussed a bit about new certification proposed by European Commission for the close to nature forest certification scheme through the biodiversity strategy and new forest strategy. Could you comment a bit how FSC sees this
does have a long-lasting relationship with the European Commission in terms of how to tackle the illegal timber trade and some other initiatives. This specific topic has also been discussed, especially when it comes to RED II directive, in the implementation of RED II directive. The FSC has been specifically focusing on this, and if I could be very short, it is in general the common understanding of FSC is that FSC does not support cutting trees for heating. Rather says that it should be only residuals that should be used for production of pellets or in general production of energy.
Okay, I see that some more questions appeared in chat for you, Aida, so maybe you can be so kind and to respond to it, and or later in discussion. One time in history, I have seen that FSC and PFC joined efforts when ISO was announced that they will prepare standard for forest certification, but as it was by Brazil initiative, so it was stopped, and now I do not see any close cooperation among those two voluntary certification schemes. Maybe European Commission initiative will cause some actually again cooperation. So thank you, Aidas, and if you'll be so kind to respond to some questions, it will be most valuable. And now we will move to another speaker, as Puneet Dwivedi, associate professor from University of Georgia. Actually, it is from the area of United States where the forest sector plays very important role, is going to present presentation on topic family forest landowners in the southern United States and their participation in sustainable biomass market. And just introduce briefly the Puneet Dwivedi. He's really very much experienced and specialized in sustainable bioenergy development, family forest landowners, forest markets, and forest-based ecosystem services. So you seems that you already ready for presentation. So Puneet, floor is yours, and we are expecting for very interesting presentation from you. Please.
Okay, thanks, Algis. I appreciate it. Now I have also started time on my side so that I don't go over time. So thank you again, everybody. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are. So let us start my presentation. And just to let you know, I'm from India and I speak fast. So just pay some attention, okay? So as Algis says, the title of my today's presentation is Family Forest Landowners in the Southern United States and their participation in sustainable biomass markets. And before I move forward, I want to thank Inge for doing all the hard work behind this screen to put all of us together at the same time, at the same place. And definitely, I am very thankful to all the funding agencies who have supported us for doing this very important workshop at a very important time where things are happening in Europe. And also there's a lot of debate about sustainability of using wood for bioenergy in this country in general, or in this part of the country, US South in particular. So this is the brief outline of my today's presentation. I will give you an idea about where US South is. I will also talk about why forestry is important in US South and how much we are contributing when it comes to forestry at the national level. Then I will start talking about family forest landowners in US South. Then slowly but surely, I will talk about how the production of utility wood pellets have increased in US South starting from 2008 and where we are moving forward in time. Then I will talk about the status of forest certification in US South. Then I will talk about best management practices, which is a little hard concept to understand, but hopefully I will be able to explain it in a manner so that you can get an idea that, okay, what best management practices are and basically what are things we do under best management practices so as to make sure that we are managing our forest land sustainably. Then I will talk about Sustainable Forestry Initiative, the biggest certification standard in United States of America as well as Canada. And then I will talk about the fiber sourcing standard and give you a big idea, basically, what are the good parameters of fiber sourcing standards are and how it actually operates. And finally, I will talk about a sustainability framework, which is bringing everything together for making sure that we are managing our forest land sustainably, we are harvesting sustainably, and on top of that, we are supplying all the buyers so that they don't worry that, okay, we are destroying our forest. That is not the case for sure. So let us dive in. So this is US South in the southern part of the United States. And as you can see, there are 13 states starting from Texas all the way to Virginia, from west to east, and starting from Kentucky to Florida, all the way from north to south. Now, some people will always say, hey, why you guys have not included West Virginia in south? But as you can see, this classification is not my classification. This classification is coming from Forest Service. So if you have complained, you know, you have to go to Forest Service. Now, jokes apart, the headquarters of USDA Forest Service for Region 8, which is US South, is in Atlanta, which is like 1 hour where I'm speaking now. So it gets very easy to deal with folks in US Forest Services because they are in just Atlanta and most of them are good friends. Now, let us talk about why forestry and US South are basically same. So first of all, the US South has a total area of 245 million acres when it comes to forestry, which comes out to be 32% of the total forest land in this country. So relatively speaking, a smaller area. But as you can see on this slide, we supply close to 63% of total softwood harvested in the country. We also supply almost 53% of the total hardwood harvested in this country. And together, if you combine these two numbers, we overall, all these 13 southern states supply 60% of total roundwood harvested in this country each year on an average. So that is why US South is also known as wood basket of United States of America. On top of that, I don't know how many of you know that every third person in this country lives in US South. So our forest lands are also helping all 1/3 of the population of this country so as to make sure their quality of life is maintained in terms of clean water, clean air, and definitely recreation services. Now let us talk about forest land ownership in the US South. So contrary to a lot of countries, as you can see, almost 86% of total forest land in US South is under private ownership. 14% belongs to federal forest lands or other type of forest lands owned by government, state governments, county governments, and so on and so forth. 28% belongs to industry. But as you can see, the highest portion belongs to almost 60% to family forest landowners, people like you and me. And if you want to further see what is going on here, so the total area of forest land area with family forest landowner is almost 140 million acres, which is further divided into 1.6 million ownership. And there are almost 3.5 million family forest landowners in US South. On an average, the mean acreage is 85 acres, but the median is 27 acres. So big numbers in terms of area, but also in terms of number of actual people. Now, if you further divide all the forest land that belongs to family forest landowners in US South into these baskets, 10 to 49 acres, 50 to 99 acres, and so on and so forth, you will find out that almost 75% of forest land, which belongs to family forest landowners, is comprised of those forest land acreages which are almost 75%. So only 25% of total forest land, which is with family forest landowners, has acreage which has more than 500 acres. So small parcels, keep that in mind. And 500 acres is relatively small in this country, right? But if you talk about number of forest landowners, right, you will find out that 98% of total family forest landowners have less than 500 acres of forest land. So there is a lot of uneven distribution, as you can see, just by looking these two graphs that are there on my slide. Now, who are these family forest landowners, right? Very million-dollar question. So as you can see, this is a general profile of family forest landowners in US South. 66 years is the average age. So definitely they are not young, most of them, right? 52% have gone to a college. So that also means that they have some other job too, not only forestry. 73% are male, so which also means the remaining are female. And out of all the people, 9% are minorities, especially African American forest landowners. Now, one interesting thing is happening in this country, or especially in US South from last 10 years. You know, as we know that average age of males is 5 years less than females. And these guys are 66 years old, predominantly male. So what is happening slowly and surely, female forest land ownership is rising in this country just because of biological reasons. So that is the latest development. And I am doing some research on those lines, and I'm finding some very interesting details as we are moving forward in our research. Now, let us talk about wood pallets. So in 2008, when I was doing my PhD at University of Florida, practically we were producing 0 million tons or even tons of wood pallets. But as you can see, starting from 2009 and all the way to 2020, as I speak, we are producing almost 7 million tons of wood pellets in this country, and most of it is exported to European Union. And all the exported wood pellets are 99% of which comes from these 13 southern states. So that is why US South has become one of the largest exporter of wood pellets in the world. And all that wood pellets that we produce, they're exported to our friends in European Union, including United Kingdom. And I have a lot of friends here and a lot of my own students now who are working in these pellet mills as a forester, as a wood procurement manager, and so on and so forth. And I think they are doing a really good job in terms of job satisfaction, and they are happy about what they do on a daily basis. Now let us talk about forest certification in the US South. So as you can see, the numbers on your right just tell you a story that out of all the forest lands that we have in US South, 245 million acres, only 15% are certified. And the reason is very simple, because of the fact that most of the land belongs to family forest landowners, and they do not have big acreages which can be certified because cost is really, really high. So as a result of which, total forest land certified is not much in terms of overall percentage, is only 15%. Now, let us talk about forestry management practices. So best management practices are proactive and often voluntary practical methods or practices used during forest management to achieve goals related to sustainability in general, or water quality, silviculture, wildlife and biodiversity, aesthetics and recreation. And forest BMP management practices are important because states do survey of loggers to figure it out whether or not they are following best management practices, because they have to track that number, because they have to report that number to United States Environmental Protection Agency, so as to make sure that we are complying with the Clean Water Act, right? So as you can see on this picture on your right, this is the stream crossing. So they have to put this structure in place if there is a stream in the forest area where the loggers are harvesting or taking out the wood. Otherwise, they will fall in trouble if somebody complains, right? And every state has a notebook where they tell exactly how logging should be done, how forest should be managed. On your left-hand side, you can see a manual, which is the State of Georgia manual. And this is a living document. We keep updating it every 5 years based on the new techniques, technologies, and science. On your right-hand side, you can see that historical compliance of best management practices in the state of Georgia, which is #1 forestry state in this country. And as you can see, overall BMPs, let me zoom in here. So as you can see here, overall BMPs have increased over time. And right now we are touching almost 95% of compliance when it comes to forestry best management practices. So really good number considering the size of the Georgia. And same is the story with every other state in this country, because every other state is almost touching 95%, and overall BMP compliance rate is 91% in this country. And also one more thing, very important. the BMPs are not only for harvesting. BMPs are also for everything else that you can think of, which happens on a piece of property. So overall, very comprehensive set of strategies to make sure that we are managing our forest lands as responsibly as possible, so as to make sure that our forests are sustainable, our sourcing is sustainable, and most importantly, our buyers are happy and they feel proud about using wood. Now, let us talk about fiber sourcing standard. Fiber sourcing standard is a little tricky, as you can see here. So just to explain it a little bit in a very crude manner, if this is a pellet mill or any mill which is consuming fiber, then basically they are sourcing from this red circle that you see. And if they are sourcing within this red circle, definitely they are logging, right? So basically the idea of fiber sourcing standard is to make sure that they only source from those loggers which are following BMPs in their respective state. So that is the fundamental idea of fiber sourcing standard. Otherwise, if you are a logger and if you're trying to supply wood to SFI mill, which is certified to a mill which is certified to fiber sourcing standard, then the mill can say, hey, you did not follow BMPs, we checked on you, somebody complained, we are not buying your wood. So that is the whole idea of fiber sourcing standard, to use the power of markets to make sure loggers are following best management practices. Now, there is a lot behind fiber sourcing standard. We do not have much time, but you can read this manual, which is a very big manual, to figure it out, more fine details of fiber sourcing standard. Now, if you are following fiber sourcing standard, if your mill is certified to a fiber sourcing standard, which means you are only sourcing fiber which is harvested by following BMPs. And if you are doing so, then definitely you are helping biodiversity, you are helping water quality, you are putting money to train logging professionals. Definitely you are putting some money to do forestry research, landowner outreach, and so on and so forth. So I will take 1 or 2 more minutes and then I will be done. So we did some little bit of research to figure it out, what is the impact of fiber sourcing standard on forestry BMPs in Georgia. If you want to read more, you can check out this publication. And what we are finding, that if you put a circle around all the mills which are certified to fiber sourcing standard in Georgia, you will find out almost 93% of forest lands are managed responsibly by following BMPs. BMP compliance on these logging sites is almost 100% when it comes to SFI mills. We are also finding that BMP implementation rate is on an average 2 or 3% higher when it comes to those logging sites from which fiber was harvested and transported to a nearby SFI mill, versus those sites which were harvested but the fiber was not supplied to a SFI mill. So that's a big thing which tells the impact of fiber sourcing standard. We also did another paper to figure it out few more things, that what is the impact of fiber sourcing standard on training. And what we are finding, that people who were trained under fiber sourcing standard, their BMP implementation rate is 94%, versus those loggers which never got training under SFI, and their implementation rate is only 87%. So that speaks about the impact of fiber sourcing standard on the sustainability of forestry resources in Georgia. And you can also see that right now, almost 75% of total wood harvested in Georgia goes to SFI mill. So again, you can understand the scope of fiber sourcing standard when it comes to sustainability of forest lands in the state of Georgia. And almost 55% of loggers told us, hey, they definitely see that BMP implementation rate has gone up in the state of Georgia because SFI mills came into existence. So definitely fiber sourcing standard has an impact on the sustainability. Now, this is the last slide about my sustainability framework. So there's a fiber sourcing standard, which is definitely putting some pressure the way the markets work, where landowners, family landowners, loggers, and industry are coming together to make sure that forestry BMPs are followed. Otherwise, you will fall in trouble when it comes to selling your own biomass. And if that is the case, if everybody is following BMPs, definitely we are helping biodiversity, water quality, people, and as a result of which, we are definitely helping our forest lands in terms of sustainability And as a result of which, all the biomass that we are producing, how we are sourcing is sustainable. And then anybody can participate in any market they want all across the globe. It doesn't matter biomass, or it doesn't matter it's a paper mill, or it doesn't matter it's a sawmill. Biomass was managed properly, forest land was managed properly, it was harvested responsibly, and then it was supplied to you responsibly. And definitely it's a lot to digest in 12, 13 minutes. But definitely I will be here if you want to ask any questions. I will be more than happy to take your questions. And definitely you can touch base with me using this email, and I will definitely get back to you over an email as soon as possible. So thanks for your time, and I appreciate all the attention.
Yeah, thank you, Puneet, and really very interesting presentation. Time is running, so maybe you can also share in chat links to articles and also to standards for audience, just to be able to analyze.
I will do that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you indeed. And as time is running, and before our next break, we have really very interesting speaker, senior sustainability expert Rolf Hogan, and he will make a presentation was titled Defining Sustainable Forest Residues, Reflection on Multi-Stakeholder Discussion to Develop Requirements for Sustainability Certification. And when you are preparing, I would like just to name a bit about Rolf, because he's an exceptional person, have a rich experience of working in with international organizations, NGOs, and also quite well known WWF or IUCN. Now it is working with Russia. Current projects include the revision of the theory of change for International Sustainable Certification Organization and establishing of national policy coordination mechanisms for NGOs in Russia. So, Rolf, the floor is yours, and as you are a journalist, writer, and also a very active person, so we expect very interesting presentation from your side. So please, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Algis. Oops, is the sound okay?
Yes, okay.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm feeling under big pressure now. And thank you very much for the invitation to speak today, and for Inge in terms of the preparation for today. So I'll get moving because I know we're short on time. And oops, let me make sure I can change my slide. Yeah. So my previous job, I spent 8 years working with the Roundtable on Sustainable Biomaterials. I left them earlier this year. So I'm going to talk today about their requirements on forestry and especially on residues, but also on some experience or some observations maybe from the discussions that happened in the Roundtable with NGOs. So RSB is not a big player in the forestry world or in the biomass world, but some points that maybe are interesting in terms of overlap. It's whatever started as a biofuel certification. It's recognized under the EU RED. It's multi-stakeholder initiative, so there's a lot of NGOs as well as business in the discussions. It's very niche rather than a mass certification. And whatever the forestry residues, yeah, an important point. RSB, as I'll show you, works across multiple sectors, and it's interesting to see that it's not just demand from the energy side for forestry residues, but also from fuel, liquid biofuel, and other materials like bioplastics, biochemicals, and even textiles and fibers. So there's many markets that are looking at the forestry residues at this time. So just very briefly on RSB, so it started in about 2008. Its objective was to tackle the rapid expansion of biofuels, or to provide a certification to ensure sustainability. The key concerns were around that rapid expansion, so issues like land grabs, especially in Africa and Latin America, and community issues related to that in terms of land rights and water access. Food security was an important thing. Also, the verification of GHG reductions was concerns that there wasn't really adequate reductions. Water use, biodiversity and conservation of habitats, and also rural development. So first certification started in 2011, and it's considered the gold standard for biofuels in terms of being kind of a very high level sustainability. basically a high level of requirements, etc. On the downside, it's often seen as quite a difficult standard for industry to work with as a result. In 2013, it expanded its scope to include biomass for energy, but also chemicals, plastics, textiles, and fibers, and other biomaterials, so beyond biofuels. And then in 2018, it went even beyond bio to include, let's say, fossil-based wastes from plastics, gases, tires, etc. Just a quick on the governance. I think similar to the other certification standards like SBP and FSC, it's multi-stakeholder. There's 5 chambers, basically 2 of those are industry, 2 of them are NGOs, and then a 5th one is academia and governments. So each chamber nominates 3 delegates to an assembly of delegates, which makes the decisions, and the decisions are usually made by consensus, though there is an option to vote if necessary. So that means the decisions can take a long time, but there's often a lot of interesting discussion that happens during the process. I mentioned the different markets, so here they are. So there was a big focus in RSB on biofuels, especially aviation, but also shipping and road transport, bioenergy, and then on the materials side. And then in terms of regulations, I mentioned EU RED, but there was also other regulations that Roman mentioned earlier on SBP that we looked at national level, or also for things like ICAO for the shipping, for aviation fuels. In terms of heat and power, so RSB was looking at basically heat generation in industry. And I have a picture here of a pint of beer, and as an Irishman, I'm very happy to put that into a presentation, probably for the first time in my life. But there's many in the beverage sector especially that were looking at sourcing biomass for heating in their facilities. And RSB, that was a market for RSB. And also RSB was recognized in Japan under the Japan feed-in tariff for electricity generation. And there we were looking especially at palm kernel shells, which were being sourced from Southeast Asia for Japan. And I think also they're being sourced for electricity in South Korea. So in terms of the requirements of RSB on woody biomass, so there's basically 4 different types of feedstocks: so forestry harvesting residues, industry processing residues, materials from orchards and plantations, and then other forestry products, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Basically, when the RSB approach, when it comes to residues, is basically to define a residue. And so there it talks about, there's 2 main issues. One is inelasticity. And that basically means that to make sure it's a real residue, you shouldn't be able to produce more of it just because the price increases. Because we're often seeing that in the biofuel market, for example, with used cooking oil. A lot of companies wanted to source it. It was seen as very sustainable. The price increased, and folks were even trying to sell palm oil, virgin palm oil, as used cooking oil because there was an incentive to do so. So it must be a real residue in that you can't just produce more of it compared to your main product. And then the other issue is the economic value ratio. So again, that's the value of the residue compared to the other main products, the primary products and co-products. And basically it's a percentage of that value of those main products, those main commercial products, and should be less than 5%. Then when we talk about harvesting or forest harvest residues, I see there was a question in the chat on FSC, how they defined residues, but this is how RSB did it. So first, there was a requirement for certification of the forest to FSC or equivalent. And basically the approach to or equivalent was that it would be assessed on a case-by-case basis, depending on the standard. So then, for the forest harvesting residues, the approach was it should be tops, limbs, and saplings, but with a diameter of the breast height of less than 5 inches or 13 centimeters. It was interesting because I see that Aidas, his response is that FSC is taking a more regional approach to the definition. And that was actually the direction that, as I was leaving RSB, that RSB wanted to take as well, because there are differences, obviously, between different climate zones, etc. In terms of forestry processing residues, so obviously there's a variety of those from sawdust to tall oil, etc. There was no forest management requirements. It just had to be ensured that they're defined as a residue, but also there should be no other use. So for example, the certified operator would have to prove that the sawdust wasn't going into particle board or wasn't being used for generating heat or power on site. Greenhouse gas calculation, obviously extremely important, and this is where we get into that other category I mentioned earlier, which is basically stem wood. So initially RSB didn't have a ban on stem wood, but said it should meet GHG requirements. So it could follow the normal methodology, which would mean that it would be, I think, impossible for it to be certified. So that would be the same methodology applied to, say, agricultural crops. But there was also an approach where it could take into account counterfactual scenarios. So that would mean sort of comparing the emissions from bioenergy production to scenarios where there was absence of the bioenergy demand. So you would look at the forest baseline and see where the forest was likely to develop in terms of generation of biomass, and what that would mean in terms of carbon sequestration compared to the actual scenario with the biomass being taken out. And that should have been calculated in a time frame no longer than 20 years. Now, this was never actually used, and the problem was we had no methodology. And so the idea was that would be approved as the case arose, but in fact it never actually arose. So there was not an outright ban on stem wood for biomass, but there was very stringent greenhouse gas accounting that was to be put in place, which I think would have made it effectively impossible for stem wood to be certified. Now, as I was leaving RSB, there was a revision of the standard that was ongoing. And that's kind of what I wanted to have some reflection on here, because I think it's quite interesting. And there's certainly been some discussion already in the chat around, some of the controversies, and they very much played out in those discussions. So there's a lot of NGOs participating, but also industry. And the initial idea of the RSB Secretariat was to move to a certification that was actually stricter than what I just described. So, for example, it was suggesting that stem wood would just be completely banned, and that I think residues, as I mentioned, would be going to a more regional approach. And there was other approaches in there that were, from an NGO perspective, in principle, should have been strengthening the approach or making it more sustainable. But the way it played out, and it's still ongoing as I understand, was that the NGOs that were participating in the discussion came in quite strongly, pushing against any kind of certification of what they called natural forests. Now, they define natural forests quite broadly, so not just, there is one definition, as I understand, to differentiate a natural forest from a plantation, where you don't plant seedlings. There's no plantations, it's just natural regeneration. But they also defined natural forests as forests where there was actual planting of trees, which I think would cover, I'm not a forest expert myself, but I think it would cover most of the forest kind of estate in most countries. And so the issues were, here I've put up some of the kind of the general issues that came up or that were behind this kind of drive from the NGOs or their concerns. So issues like the expansion of forest use based on the demand. So beyond just certification of individual sites, but they were concerned that there was going to be a big increase in forest use, big increase in demand for biomass, that would impact on the carbon sink and the biodiversity. There was big concerns about how residues were defined, and there was big concerns that there was kind of large branches, there was logs and stumps being included in those residues, and that was a big concern. And there was even, when we were kind of saying, well, look, we've got a very strict definition of the residues, they for many of them, they would not believe that that was actually applied in practice, or they felt that there was ways for that to be avoided. Things like depletion of nutrients by taking out forest residues, expanding the forest estate they were concerned, the argument that, okay, the forest estate is expanding in many countries. They were worried that most of the expansion was plantations, which wouldn't have the same benefits for carbon sequestration and biodiversity. And then also generally, again, related to the expansion of forestry operations, that forestry would become more profitable and there'd be an expansion into new areas. So most of the issues were, if you like, kind of bigger than certification, because as a certifier, we could say, well, okay, we can go in and we can look at one forester or forest kind of operation, how it's been managed and audited and make sure it's sustainable. But these issues were kind of bigger. It was more about the concerns about the whole market and the way it was being developed, and so it was in a way almost unfortunate that it being played out in the certification system, because it made it very complicated and difficult for any progress to be made. And so just some kind of underlying issues that were problematic was, again, as I mentioned, the credibility of residues, concerns about the use of roundwood, that even though residues were being certified, that there was somehow roundwood slipping into, underneath the net or through the net. There's this definition of natural forests, as I mentioned. There was also a lot, it was interesting in the discussions, industry folks or even academic folks would come to the table and say, well, look, here's a paper that points to, carbon sequestration in managed forests. And there was sort of let's say a disbelief, or there was some NGOs that would say, well, no, we don't accept that paper for whatever reason.
Okay, Rolf, it is good to conclude, actually. We are a little bit over time.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, just last point here. So basically, just to conclude, overall, I think there was very much a lack of constructive dialogue. I guess we were trying to have it within the certification system, but I was left with the impression that it needed to take place maybe outside of the certification system, where these issues could be addressed, at a national level, etc. And really, people spend time. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much for the time today, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Yes, thank you very much, Rolf. And I think that it will be a possibility for dialogue after the break, when we'll have a panel discussion, and hopefully all of you will participate here. You have time to rest, and now it is awaiting a very interesting and important panel discussion. I would like to ask Inge, it is not with us still, so probably we will have short presentations of audience which has not been discussed and presenting their ideas first. So we'll ask Andris Vanaks, Latvian country management from Green, to make short 5-minute introduction. And I would like, when you preparing your short presentation, Andris, I would like to say that you are really experienced, have 20 years of experience in energy industry, project management, site supervision, and energy consulting, and also you are very active with several NGOs like Latvian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Finnish Chamber of Commerce, Latvian Renewable Energy Federation, so on and so on. Hopefully you will present a bit about yourself more as time is running, so floor is yours.
Hello, good evening, everybody. Can you see my presentation now?
Yes, excellent.
Great. So thank you for introduction, and it's my pleasure to be here and discuss and give my input for this important topic. I'm Andris Vanaks. I am country manager of company Gren operations in Latvia. Gren company is well known in industry, and recently we did rebranding during reconstruction, and we operate right now under the brand Gren. And it consists of two first letters of green energy. In the same time, it's a male name in Nordics, and it's also the branch name Le Grain in French language. We operate in 3 countries, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. and we provide electricity and district heating mainly, and we are working for strategical industrial consumers energy services as well. So mainly our production is based on local and renewable fuels. Here you can see Estonia, 2 cities, Pärnu and Tartu, Jelgava, and in Latvia, and Klaipėda and Kaunas in Lithuania. And we are using biomass and waste residues as our main fuel, and only for startup and some technological purposes we are using fossil fuel as a peat and natural gas as well. So in Jelgava city, we are operating in a district heating sector. We provide heat for entire Jelgava city. It's second or fourth largest city in Latvia, and it's 92% renewable energy our customers are getting in their living areas. So it's including residential buildings, multi-apartment buildings, commercial buildings, and some industrial consumers as well. We were using natural gas. Right now we are using basically biomass, and not using gas only in peak hours, and in future we are planning to use also waste residues. It's some numbers and fuel as a biomass what we are using. It's mainly residues from forest processing or from wood processing in factories. So it's bark, it's sawdust, different forest and food processing leftovers, and agricultural biomass as well. For instance, grain processing residues. And in future waste the fuel. And why heating is so important? That's, I think, our geographically very specific, and that's the point where small is large, because our customers pay on annual basis 3 times more for heating than they pay for electricity consumption. And this is clearly the role, in my understanding, where we can use efficiently biomass as a resources with high efficiency use as a resources for heating and for co-incineration in cogeneration plants, producing the same time heating and electricity. And this is a really important issue for our customers, because it is affordable, competitive services of energy we can provide. Thank you from my side, and this is my introduction.
Yes, thank you very much, Andres. I think that we'll have possibility and opportunity to continue this discussion, but now we'll turn to another panel participant, Sune Bala-Hansen, Biomass Sustainability Lead, and he will speak about wood chip and pellet bio perspective on sustainable documentation for energy production outside the Baltic states. So Sune, I think it is the best if you introduce a bit yourself in addition, and 5 minutes of your presentation, please. Sune, we do not hear you. Can you switch your mic?
Ida, can you maybe check that he is co-host?
Yeah, he should be co-host.
Yeah.
Are you there?
Sune, are you there?
Seems that Sune is connected.
Okay, now is it working?
Now it is okay.
Yeah, sorry, I was keep clicking before, nothing happened.
Oh.
Also, I don't seem to be able to turn on my camera suddenly. But anyway,
right. 1 second, I'll just.
Maybe because I went into the presentation mode.
Okay.
Oh, so here, okay, okay, it's up here.
Now it is okay. Yeah.
Okay. Can you all see my presentation, first of all?
Yes, but not you yet.
And this one. There you go. Now you can see me as well.
Yeah.
Sorry for the delay. Basically, yeah, okay. I am a biomass sustainability lead in HO4, as was introduced. I am an environmental engineer by training. I have a PhD in life cycle assessment, so I'm a bit more technical. I'm not a forester per se, but through my time in HO4, obviously I have become more and more familiar with forestry and biomass, obviously. I think I'll move straight to it and start the presentation. So I will be presenting a bit on the you can say the requirements that we have for sustainability and very quickly on the challenges, but I think we'll come back to more of that in detail in the panel discussion afterwards. So now I just have to ensure that I am actually sorry, mixing around a bit here. Does it move now? Yes, good. Very quickly about HO4, we are actually a utility company in Copenhagen. As you can see on the diagram, we have a lot of different utilities. I'm not going to go into all those details, but a bit of that is heat production and district heating. Distribution to Copenhagen. We're not only using biomass, we're using mainly biomass, but not only. We also have a few heat pumps, and we are extending that area as well. So we basically have you can say multi-stranded renewable district heating production. So, but talking specifically about the biomass, we have a big plant in Copenhagen where we have 2 lines. We have a pellet line and we have a wood chip line, and as you can see, the amounts are fairly big for the wood chips. I believe it's actually the biggest single wood chip plant in combined heat and power plant in the world for the time being. And this plant is then producing heat for about 600,000 people in Copenhagen. I will move on quickly to the more interesting parts, which is the new legislation that we have in Denmark, which is called built on RED II, has to be RED II compliant. Before this, we had an industry agreement, which was so-called voluntary, but which had, you can say, to a large extent, the same sustainability requirements as we have now. So the new Danish legislation is kind of a combination between RED II and the industry agreement, and therefore it actually goes beyond RED II a little bit, which I'll come back to. Of course, we need third-party verification to abide by the laws, and there's been a big process of stakeholder engagement in setting this up, which has meant that we have what we feel is both an ambition and operational legislation in Denmark now, which we are happy with. As you can see, it goes beyond RED II, also because not only the district heating plants and power plants are involved, but actually also domestic pellets and other industries which use biomass in their boilers. And we also go beyond in that we have many different types of biomass included in the legislation that must meet sustainability requirements. What I'll focus on here is the forest biomass. So I'm not going to all the other parts. In RED II, I'm not going to go into the details. You have heard some about RED II before. So I'll go into what is actually beyond the beyond RED II, and that is some additional biodiversity requirements that we need to fulfill. And then there is additional carbon stock requirements that we have to make sure not only the LULUCF sector is positive, but this forest sector in itself is positive where we are sourcing our biomass from. If that is not the case or it cannot be documented, then we need to have a forest management certification. Otherwise, SPP certification is in general sufficient to meet the requirements of the Danish legislation. You can say at least once, as you heard earlier, that the new requirement, the new you can say, the new standards of SPP will come into operation next year. I'll quickly move on and we can come back to the details in discussion, but just as I mentioned, SPP compliant biomass is our main requirement. We do need SPP because one thing, it is very operational, it's risk-based, it is focusing on where the actual challenges is, which is very good. And then it also provides us with feedstock data and CO2 data, which we need for our documentation towards the authorities. In some cases, depending on our risk assessment, we might also require some forest management certification behind the SPP. So as I mentioned, we have an additional risk assessment whenever we are entering a new country or a new supplier. We do additional risk assessments and comprehensive supplier dialogue. And then, of course, we have monitoring of what's going on in the countries where we operate, read reports, talk to our suppliers and so forth to make sure we always up to date with the newest developments. The challenges that we are facing in the Baltics, you can say generally we are quite happy with the situation in the Baltics. Quite a significant amount of our biomass comes from the Baltics, since Denmark itself is not, you can say, very rich in forest. So we are quite happy with what we're seeing in Baltics. We are, of course, some concerned with some reports coming out and how to communicate whether these reports are based on facts or feelings. But that is, you can say, the main issue. Then we are, of course, concerned with the potential issues with LULUCF in the future, that there might be some negative forest accounting. But I think that's about it for now, and I'll be happy to go into more details in the panel discussion.
Thank you, Sune. Of course, impressive scope of operations and also influence into the market, so it is very important. And what about Aiga Grasmane, as a managing director of the Latvia National Forest Owners Association? Aiga, are you already connected? Yes, I will tell a bit about you. You are really well known in Latvia because you have more than 20 years of experience, starting as a specialist working in Ministry of Agriculture, later working in State Forest Service, and last 15 years you are linked and working actively with the Latvian Forest Owners Association. With EU policy issues, specialized on Green Deal issues, with forest education on sustainable forest management and communication activities. So it is really could be nice to hear from private forest owners' perspective from Latvia, a bit about biomass, how it is delivered from the private forest. Aiga, floor is yours if you are available. Yes.
Okay, thank you, and very sorry for this technical delay, but let's go with the next slide. My colleague from forest sector, Mārcis Saklaurs, spoke of from Forest Owners Cooperative. They are manager. He gave a manager's point of view, and I'm representing the Latvian Forest Owners Association. That we are a more like lobby organization. We work on national legislation and promoting sustainable forest management, and then also on EU level. Thank you. Next slide, please. Speaking about today's topic, I would like to speak about two main things. One is diversity of European forests, and also about future prospects that are brought to us by EU Green Deal. And speaking about the land use way, which we call forest management, then of course in Baltic countries it is a very important sector, and the main thing maybe for today's discussion is that there are no forests managed for obtaining biomass. The forests are managed for their multifunctionality, and this is it has very long history, and it has long-term planning in future. And I kind of created my own definition that sustainable forest management in Latvia, I think in Baltic states, this is a management of natural ecosystem for the needs of mankind, and it is very carefully ensured by national legislation, and it is supported by forest science. To maintain these functions that we have, there is very strict legislation on how forests should be managed. It is quite prescriptive. I would say that there is some part of freedom in forest owners' hands, but it is very regulated, especially as for harvesting. There is a set limit for tree harvesting for each species, for spruce and for pine and for birch. So it means that our legislation is very much focused on nature conservation, and there are many detailed factors that forest owners have to consider when harvesting. So to consider these nature values so that there is less harm done. Let's go to next slide, please. Yes, yesterday there was the topic on habitat inventory in Latvia, so this habitat mapping, and there still are a lot of hot discussions on this topic, and because the methodology allowed to map also forest habitats with diverse quality. It means that there were high quality habitats found, and also of low quality, so-called low quality forest habitats. And this is, so the representation of forest habitats in Latvia is very good, as we know, because the large area there is with forest. And then this discussion on the quality is something different. And so it means that our legislation, in fact, has ensured that there were large areas of habitats mapped, and now the discussion is on the quality. So I would say that not many forest owners are happy now to get letters that we found this and that forest habitats in your forest, as this automatically brings some restrictions on management, although this is a result of our legislation, and our legislation is definitely a long-term vision. It doesn't mean that we want to protect everything that is in particular forest site, a particular forest at a particular time, but we want to make sure that forests are diverse in the long term. And as a result, so we get these reports that if you harvest, let's say, spruce stand that is say 90 years old, and it has some structures there, and somebody has called it a habitat, then we get these reports that, of course, they are damaging forest owners, this image, and then forestry is considered or called unsustainable, which is not like that. So this is like a challenge that we have in communication. And of course, the media gladly take these reports. So next slide, please. So now looking at the EU Green Deal and the policy documents that are being designed today. So forest owners and managers have really concerned about the sustainable forest management concept and future, and the restrictions that are now brought in by the Green Deal documents. But as the forest industry looks at the wood products, then objective, of course, is not to continue to use in the same amount the forest biomass for energy. The objective is to invest in technologies and in science to develop new products for forest biomass, because we have to be we have to be more efficient in how we use the material that we have to phase out fossil fuels and to be more efficient in circular economy. Next slide, please. Yes, and returning to the EU Green Deal documents, there are still so many questions that are not answered. So so the first thing that that we are not satisfied is this top-down approach. As we know how diverse the European forests are, then this top-down approach is not suitable for all countries to achieve their forest management goals. In southern countries, there are challenges that are not so big in northern countries and vice versa. So the national legislation and forest management plans, they are designed to address local and national needs. So this approach is not supposed to be working. That's what we think. And there are many questions that are not answered about wood availability in future, because as we know in all these documents in RED 2 and 3 and the LULUCF regulation and forest strategy, they are all looking at protective function of forest protection, and not talking about bioeconomy goals or phasing out fossil fuels and increasing the use of this renewable materials. So we have not heard, even on such important aspects as climate change mitigation, we have not heard these answers. So so maybe some partners in this conference also can address these questions and also can contribute maybe to these documents, so that there is more understanding about the importance of sustainable forest management as it is as we look at it today. Thank you for attention.
Thank you, Aiga, and hopefully you will be able to also to participate in our panel discussion, as it is important to discuss and to speak about processes and how these requirements from society, from politicians regarding sustainable management of forest resources correspond to objectives which arise from renewable energy directive, from Bauhaus, from forest strategy, and all other initiatives, both internationally and nationally, and how to balance all this. And today it was already very interesting presentations covering different aspects from industry to forest owners in Europe and in the United States of America. I have seen that in the chat people are participating, and we have had really a very good attendance. More than 80 participants has been participating in our conference. Now I see more than 60. The audience is still waiting for our interesting discussion. So probably before we'll go to questions in chat, and please write your questions, and if you have some particular speaker who can comment, so define him. But one question which is already has been raised by several participants of our this dialogue, it was, what about renewable energy directive and forest certification schemes? Because both PFC and FSC, it is not really finally decided how to support renewable energy directive. And I have seen that sooner you have commented on this a bit, so maybe you can continue and to explain what is, how you see the situation, how those voluntary certification systems which are used to certify forest will be linked to renewable energy directive and to guaranteeing sustainability of the biomass which coming from forest for bioeconomy and bioenergy So could you comment, Sune?
Yeah, I can continue a bit on that. I think Roman actually might be in a better position to answer some of it regarding the approval process. I know they're in the middle of that, and also sorry, was it Aidas FSC? But I believe the process is. I think I wrote in the comment November. I think that actually that is the time when the EU is expecting to come up with the final guidelines for how to approve. So actually, I think the whole timing is a bit later than that. But hopefully, maybe by end of the year, it would be possible to have some approved schemes. And of course, our objective would be that all the schemes would be approved. That would definitely be the preference for us, because we use all three schemes actively, both FSC, PFC, and SPP. So I know that some challenges in that, for example, FSC and PFC do not have LULUCF accounting, which is a requirement in RED 2. There's also some issues relating to the chain of custody standards, I believe. But so it might be some you can say partial approval. I think also is possible. But it's of course very interesting to see where it all ends up, because it's a bit backwards if, for example, a forest certification is not approved. In many terms, forest certification is the strongest when you look at the forest isolated. I mentioned before, SPP is very important for us because of the operational approach that it has and the data that we are getting from the supply chain. But there are issues, you can say, or situations where the forest management model is more robust if we find high risk areas, for example. So we would definitely prefer to have everything, you can say, approved by the EU, no doubt about it.
Okay, Sune, thank you very much. And Roman, are you going to add something to this Sune's intervention?
Yeah, I will try. So first of all, SBP scheme itself is in the process, and we are expecting to get technically approved in coming months. Then regarding FSC and PFC, to my knowledge, we do not know that they have applied, actually. These applications were public, so you could see them on the Commission website, which schemes have applied. And to my knowledge, FSC and PFC schemes were not on the list. Things may have changed. They may have applied later, let's say after summer or something, but that will definitely take them quite some time. I tried to ask the Commission and their assessment consultants about whether those schemes have applied. They couldn't tell it because it's confidential. And no, as far as the last thing I heard, that FSC was still discussing internally whether they want to apply or not. I would only speculate indeed that if they would even apply, then perhaps they would apply for sustainable harvest criteria compliance, like partial compliance, and not LULUCF, and definitely not greenhouse gas calculation methodologies. And they indeed have some potential contradicting requirements regarding the mass balance. So in FSC and PFC, there are different rules, so they would not match in RED 2. And I think knowing again FSC as a huge scheme, not moving very fast usually, they will find it hard to really adopt to RED 2 quickly. What I would like still to mention on behalf of SBP, that we would love these schemes to get recognized. Of course, because that would make our life also easier. We could focus on our systems of providing online platforms and on providing system to collect greenhouse gas emission information and pass through the supply chain. But we could rely on those claims from those schemes. As it was mentioned there, it seems to be very credible, but we don't know. I mean, what we are now as a what consequence it has on our recognition is that currently our recognition will be without proxy, without blanket approval of those claims. So biomass producers certified against SBP to make RED 2 claims, SBP RED 2 claims, will need to apply a risk-based approach to all sources. And then we are currently exploring how those claims still be used as a mitigation. So we are seeing a scenario where there will be no blanket approval anymore, and you'll be making risk assessment, and maybe you'll be able to justify that if forest is certified for, state for forest for 10 years against FSC and PSC, then it should probably be compliant with many SBP requirements and retro requirements. But that will be a different process, because now it's really simple. You take FSC claim, you convert it to SBP claim, and that's easier. I mean, you collect emission data on top. That is going to change for sure.
Okay, thank you for this comment. And of course, if looking from forest owner or forester perspective, it is always good to have simple and understandable system with clear criteria and indicators to be followed. And as we see it from current perspective, every initiative try to create own certification or verification system with own criteria, and that makes system quite with a heavy bureaucracy, complicated and difficult to follow. Just not mention taxonomy directive and its implementation. About the sustainable finances, we haven't spoken today, but that it is also very probably will affect very much possibilities for operation in forest and of biomass supply to the industry, to the bioenergy purpose and bioeconomy. So I would like to ask Gerimantas Gaigala, as in your presentation, you really look quite widely at the different aspects. Gerimantas, are you with us? Yes, nice. So could you comment on if from this perspective you see the picture quite in a holistic view? If someone asks you as expert a recommendation, what you propose, to which direction we should move forward, and from our discussion, what recommendations, main recommendations you proposed just to highlight?
You mean in the direction, just to clarify the question?
Yeah, just how to have a simple, clear system for verification of the sustainability when we are speaking about forest management and supplying biomass for forest energy and for bioeconomy.
Concerning the Baltic countries, we see actually the quite big mess in the protected area system. The system, let's say Lithuania, in some extent, and the other Baltic countries, they're not so clear set up, taking into account all EU directives, Natura 2000, and the protection regimes are not clear, they are not simple. This creates confusion among the private forest owners. I understand that these questions, they are maybe more on the board of state table. If there would be a very clear protected area system and initiative for the private forest owners to protect, let's say, compensation mechanism or whatever, I think it will be quite simple. Now, as I see, the state has not inventorized all, let's say, protected areas. And in certain cases, there is not clear, according to the law, which and how the protected area shall be protected. And I think we're doing the job of the state in many cases. So this would help to simplify, because as you see, the main concerns are not about the, let's say, other aspect except the high conservation value forest. This is the hot topic. And also I would point out that the communication with key stakeholders, because at the moment it seems that stakeholders understand differently the use of biomass. There are concerns coming from big stakeholders that the good timber, good roundwood with a high quality is used for biomass, which is not correct. And this creates the resistance for using the biomass, and awareness that biomass could be sustainable is quite not quite in the public. So for me, I see the hot points is the understanding of the sustainability of biomass and the making the good system of protected areas simple, because in many cases I see that according to the paper there is a protection, but there is not real protection. Better to protect in reality less than big amount on the papers. And I think this also for private forest owners is quite big headache. How to at the same time not to make the loss for the income, and from other side to satisfy the pressure to protect the high conservation value forest. So here is the biggest issue.
Okay, thank you, Gerimantas. And I think that Kate Klein is putting on chat a very appropriate question, and she's asking what approach is recommended to reconcile the top-down pressures to protect all forest with the need for investment to improve forest management. And anyway, forest should supply biomass. So what could be a solution here? Maybe someone from our panel members can respond to it. Anyone? Andres Vanax, are you with us?
Yes, I can hear you, but
yeah.
it's not exactly my knowledge so detailed about that question.
Sure. So who can take responsibility to ask? Liviu, you are expert.
I'm not expert, but I could try to say some words on this, because I was somehow glad to see that the final speech of Aiga and the one which I started more or less went into the same direction. So the perspective of forest owners is what we identified in our research. We see this top-down approach coming from EU forest strategy, coming from biodiversity strategy, from all this. We are aware that forest owners perceive that more regulation will come on them. And especially this top-down approach here in this question is related to protected areas and to how to reconcile this strict regulation for protected areas with forest investment. We heard in the last presentation the term multifunctionality. Many countries have used this in their forest policy, and the direction where we go now, it's more on segregation. We want to set aside forest with no interventions, considering that this will be good for biodiversity conservation, and we want to separate forest for investments and for biomass production. This segregation is a trend that we see it in the biodiversity strategy, where we are asked to set aside 10% of the land in strict protection. We see it now in the EU forest strategy, but it's not necessarily that this is a good direction. So I will like to more or less consider again the multifunctionality, and to see in which direction forest owners can be advised to manage that forest, to integrate both biodiversity conservation and provision of timber. And here I like the presentation of Puneet with the best management practices and that book. And I also want to comment on this, also from a certification perspective. When we set certification standards, and I just have the experience with auditing in Romania, we just ask forest owners to respond to the indicators, and we give them the list of criteria and indicators, and they have to do their best to respond to this and to provide evidences that they fulfill these indicators. But in few cases, we give them a book with you have to do it like this with best management practices. This is the best management practice that you should apply in order, for example, to fulfill the certification requirements. Even auditors are not allowed to say you should do it like this. Auditors are bound by this, and they go there and say, well, you have to do it in your way. I'm not allowed to tell you how to do it. I'm just coming here and see if you fulfilled or not the requirement. So this might be my 2 points here. Multifunctionality and integration of biodiversity conservation in forest management by using best management practices approach. Thank you.
And Liviu, Anders Lasdinš just write in chat 2 questions, but one it is very linked to your topic. In your presentation, you just described differences in Nordic countries, in the Western European countries, and Eastern European countries, where it is a style of regulation is quite different. So, and this is mentioning that it is 2 systems, recommendations in Nordic and regulation in Soviet style based forestry. And he is asking what can be done to eliminate duplication of regulations and administrative burden. So maybe you can just a bit elaborate on this. And another question I will ask Aiga to respond if she is available. But regarding those strict regulation and recommendations, more rely on foresters and forest owners'
yes,
responsibility.
We are a country, speaking again about Romania, in which we did not want to change the regulation design during the communist time. We said these are very good regulations, and they really were good when all forests belonged to the state, and we were in the communist times, and we said we don't want to change them because this provides the stability of the forest ecosystem. Rotation age is 120 years. Naturally, forests are 90%, and they are a good system. But when you had 40% of the country in private forest ownership, we realized that this does not function. And the main problem is enforcement of this very strict regulation. So at the moment, we do have these very strict rules, but in practice, we have a lot of legal infringements, let's say. And we are now in the position in Romania to discuss if, okay, the system might be good, but we need other policy instruments. So at the end, we can recommend to the forest owners that the best practice is to plant the specific tree in a specific site, but I need to let him make the decision or to put some money on the table in this direction. I get to continue, and I will be back.
Okay, because on this another question, it is why some environment NGOs keep Soviet style restrictive legal approach, and what should be done to get rid of it and start to trust forest owners. So maybe Aiga, it is also your area of activities, and maybe you can comment on that, what you are doing in Latvia to avoid this confrontation and to start cooperation. Yes, we do. Could you, Aiga, could you switch mic? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I would like to respond to what was previously said about this top-down approach and segregation. I don't see that there is a segregation in the planned approach to forest management, because as if we speak about protected areas, then this is fine, that the main objectives there is protection of biodiversity and landscapes. If we if we set aside some areas, it doesn't mean that in the rest of the so-called commercial forests there will be more freedom to forest owners. No, those LULUCF regulation, biodiversity strategy, forest strategy, and taxonomy criteria, they are all aimed at decreasing forest management activities, decreasing investments in forest infrastructure, which means that those countries that would still are lagging behind in developing forest infrastructure, they would have less possibilities to develop it. So I would not agree that there is more freedom to be given in forest investment. So I think that this integrated approach on large area of forest of a country's territory works very well, because this is multifunctionality, and we're not talking about multifunctionality in protected areas. There are biodiversity goals as priority, but in the rest, there should be multifunctionality maintained and not restricted, because this is all going to harvest less, to be less productive in this direction. And responding to what Andis Lasdin is saying, I would say it's a political question. And what we can do is we should try to convince our politicians to listen to forest scientists, and not those who are not forest scientists, if we're talking about forest management and land management, including biodiversity protection. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So from emotions to rational arguments, as understood, Aiga proposed to follow. And of course, we have Mārcis Saklaurs from Forest Cooperative. And Mārcis, if you are with us and you can join our discussion, maybe you can just speak a bit what motivate forest owners working in cooperative to invest into the forest and sustainable forest management and guarantee sustainable supply of biomass for industry, for bioenergy, for bioeconomy use? Mārcis, can you join our discussion? Oh. Okay, seems that Mārcis is just connected and maybe not available here, but it is a really important thing to do. But Andris, I return back to you, as you're working in several countries and see market from the supply side, how forest owners and forest managers deliver biomass. So how you can comment the situation and what could be done to improve situation to for verification, simple verification, compliance with sustainability requirements and guarantee sustainable deliveries of biomass into the industry. So could you join our discussion here?
Yes, thank you for this question. The deliveries and resources available and criteria to recognize the stability of biomass are questions where there should not be gaps for discussion. It should be agreed on scientific level, and politicians need to incorporate and agree on needed policies and those policies to be maintained for long term. Because in energy infrastructure, when we build a project, energy generation project, it's about 20 years of lifetime. And lifespan for forest industry management is even longer. And so this is important. But for us, we are located in Baltics, where we consume resources, local resources. And we are sourcing our resources, let's say, within 100 of kilometers from place we are consuming and producing energy. So it's easy for us not only to see the paper of sustainability, but also go to suppliers and check on site, whatever it takes, once a week. If we have some suspicious, let's go there once a day. And we have really good control on existing situation and understanding that we are purchasing sustainable materials for our production facilities. And in that sense, it should not be more complicated. And we would like to be sure that there are this certification umbrella of forest management. And if we purchase resources for energy or for construction, whatever we consider as a user of these resources, that it is safe to use and it is sustainable material. So it should be a simple approach. And if there are existing certification systems like for forest management, if there are gaps identified, let's improve and continue. And so it's important to keep on working on it. It is not like fixed forever, but improvements should supplement but not replace existing practices very much. So there are fine-tunements, and every 5 years or every year there are development is possible. For instance, also for energy production, situation is much different today than it was 10 years ago, because there are other technologies developed. And today, I would say biomass for electricity production is not the only way. And there are much more energy we can produce right now in wind. We can produce much more in solar. With the future, there will be accumulation in hydrogen or in batteries. And these kind of alternatives becoming cheaper, and new technologies are coming in. And so pressure to forests and biomass for energy will not be so high in the future. Of course, we are a people. We will be exploiting the nature. We have been exploiting fossil fuels in the past. Right now, we are concentrating on biomass as a good fuel, but it has certain limits in it. In Latvia, and we cannot expect from forests to deliver twice much in 10 years than we are using right now. We have been optimizing forest materials continuously for long term already, and the reserves there for more materials are not high, let's say so. And what's important, there are really differences between countries of forest availability, of differences for climate. We need heating, and heating in our Baltic countries and farther north constituting more than 60% of country energy demand. It's about heating. Electricity is only 20%, and remaining part is transport fuels. And heating here is important, and the policies for heating and biomass should be much different than it is in Spain. And there should be this site and country-specific regulation and changes because of specific situation should be possible. There will be no one system for all European countries. And this freedom should be left for countries to decide how they will fulfill the targets.
Okay, Andres, thank you very much for this quite interesting explanations and intervention. Of course, it is interesting and important, and when we see looking to LULUCF recent development, and with the idea that wood which is used domestically will be accounted as a sequestered CO2 if it will be made products, but if wood is exported to another country, so it will be not included in the accountancy. So probably it will also direct and influence somehow overall wood market. I do not know for sure how it will affect the biomass for energy purpose. Maybe sooner you know a bit and can comment what is can we expect in this aspect, because carbon border tax, it will be from outside European Union, but this LULUCF calculations, which is a changing system, it is going to change, can affect the biomass trade between countries definitely. Could you comment a bit on this?
Yeah, I can certainly not give an answer, but I can give an opinion, at least on this. Of course, there's a lot of speculation going into this, but obviously, when leaving the wood, you can say in materials or in the forest, if that actually gives you a carbon benefit in your LULUCF accounting, then obviously that will affect how much you would actually export or take out for other purposes. Exactly how big this will be, of course, is very difficult to say. By far, most of, I would say, I can't put a percentage, but there's a very little fraction in this gray zone where I can say this could move either towards pulp, for example, or towards biomass. By far, the largest proportion of the biomass cannot be used for anything else anyway, so you would not really export it. So of course, unless all countries start using their own biomass internally in the country, but as Andres very rightly said, a lot of countries don't have heat requirements, or especially not district heating, and therefore you can say the use of biomass becomes less interesting. Still a lot of plants or many places in Europe are using biomass for pure electricity, but there are alternatives coming up for that rapidly, obviously with cheaper wind and solar as well. Not to say that biomass is not needed at this point. It certainly is, also because you need to have to ensure that you always have electricity supply, obviously. But I also see a future where you can say there's a lot of other alternative energy sources which are coming in and supplementing, you can say, and taking over to a certain extent from biomass. Got a little bit away from the topic, which is how is this LULUCF going to impact us? And the truth is that we don't know yet how this actually is going to pan out. But we don't expect it to be a really big issue, as said, because it is most of it is what Rolf earlier called pure residues. What do you call it? This is something that can certainly not be used for other purposes.
Okay, thank you very much. And here is Bruna Campos from Euro Natur. She put a question in chat and comments that about 86% of the habitats in forest habitats in Europe are in unfavorable conservation status. So, and the question is, so what is the drastic different management methods that you think will impose forest habitats, or maybe put in different form? What could be management methods applied different from existing that we can reach a balance, favorable status of habitats, good management and stable supply? So who can comment on this? Maybe Aidas Pivoriūnas, because you are not only FSC representative, but also representative of forest owners. So Aidas, are you with us?
Thank you, Algis, for giving me the opportunity to address one of the hardest questions. It's very hard to answer, but I would definitely start from small steps from myself or from small forest owners. Yeah, good best practice forest management examples. I wouldn't agree that forest management should be completely focused on conservation. It's one of the measures of forest management. We do have several issues in Lithuania, for example, where even 15 years ago, not to mention 45 years ago, there were a couple of species, bushes on the coast that have been natural and have been protected even in the red list book of threatened species, now are treated as the species that should be removed as invasive species. So nature differs from time to time, and yeah, it's too objective to put the question like this.
Okay, Aida, thank you very much. And I see that Aiga Grassman also raising the hand. So Aiga, please comment.
Yes, so I have two comments regarding the status of habitats. So one is about methodology. So good condition of forest habitats is in a forest that has not been managed for decades. As we know, then the objective of forest management is productive, resilient to climate change, multifunctional forests. So there is this conflict already in the methodology. So how can you be looking for unmanaged forest in a managed forest? It is fine to do habitat mapping and evaluating the quality, but let's separate in protected areas, and then we can analyze whether the tools that are used in biodiversity protection in protected areas, whether they work. And there have to be different targets for habitat quality in a managed forest. So this is one thing. And another thing is, another problem with the methodology is that in case of Latvia in year 2013, it was opinion of experts about the quality of forest habitats. So, and the recent discussions in the European Commission are aiming at getting rid of opinion-based evaluation on forest habitats. So there still the reports that were recently submitted in the past 10 years, they also can have this opinion of which is not it is not like a database, it is an opinion. When some experts visit forests and they say that this forest habitat is in bad quality, and so this is used like argument for change from bioeconomy targeted forest management to protection. Thank you.
Yeah, Iga, thank you very much. And as yesterday in discussion, Inge, it was told by representative of a state forest company that in Denmark you have the second largest owner. It is an environmental foundation and NGO who owns a forest and manage in a way they think it is most appropriate. So Inge, can we involve you into the discussion because you're organizer, but I think that you should be also productive discutant here. So how you see this form of development when foundations, NGOs are purchasing forest land and implement management as they see it is appropriate? You have some Danish example when we try to turn commercial forest by burning, exploding into the natural situation. So maybe you can comment a bit how you see this development and what good practice we can use in Baltic countries also.
Yeah, I cannot speak for these foundations, but of course I can see the trend in Denmark that there's a very high focus on conservation of biodiversity and the wish to set aside forest to conserve biodiversity. So in that sense, there's nothing wrong with private actors buying up forest and managing it for this purpose. They've also been, people also buy up forest to go hunting or other non-wood production purposes. But of course, if it happens to a very large extent, as also, I mean, it's maybe an important thing that Eric was telling us yesterday, that the state forests are setting aside very large areas of their property. So the question is, what about the wood supplies in the end, as we also discussed it yesterday? I mean, here and now, maybe we won't see the consequences. We will maybe, our wood industries will maybe import it, and generally wood products will be based on more imported wood from the Baltics, for example. But what will it mean to wood supplies when we set it, if all countries start to do this, and if it becomes a trend that is really much more extensive than we see it today? So that's maybe my worries. What will happen then? That will put pressures in the end on some other areas.
Thank you, Inge, very much. And yesterday it was really a very hot discussion on one of the main questions: from where money comes to keep managing, to keep ecosystem services in good shape, which forest provide, to keep specialists working, because we can ruin very quickly, but how to create again, it is not happening at once. And so all system is very rely on each other and all elements. Because of that, we have Forest Europe process, where not only a member state but also European Union is signatory, and we speak about criteria and indicators which guarantee and ensure sustainable forest management. So I see that Puneet would like to enter and to share experiences from over the sea. So Puneet, please, the floor is yours. And please, colleagues, raise your hands who would like to make some interventions, because we have just 10 minutes of our time left for discussion. So please use this possibility. So please, Puneet, the floor is yours.
Oh, thanks. Like, keep getting this question all the time, that what we should do so as to make sure that we have better forests which are multifunctional, we are producing wood responsibly, at the same time we are taking care of biodiversity. And I don't know how many of you know that US South is the, I don't know, headquarters of freshwater biodiversity in the world. So keep that in mind. So a lot of biodiversity, especially freshwater, you cannot go wrong here, especially in US South, higher parts of hills of Alabama and Georgia. Now, personally, you know, as a person who has seen forestry in this country and also in other countries, if, you know, it is my personal belief that if we rely too much on government support for managing forest lands, we will land up in a place where California is. So we have to be very careful, because at the end of the day, everything will be burned and who knows what will happen after that. Definitely that is a detrimental to biodiversity or even wood production, you name it. All the forest is gone. It's so much of fire every year. So what my personal understanding is that we, you know, government support is always appreciated. They can make things really fast, but we should definitely try to put more focus on the power of markets so as to make sure that we have sufficient resources to manage our forest lands. At the same time, we are not falling into the trap where we have a lot of difficulties because we were relying too much on government. So my solution of bringing investment is basically bring more users of wood, use more wood for making big buildings, make a lot of things from wood, because that also gives you advantage in terms of storing carbon in wood products for a very long time. But that's the thing, you know, create more markets and make sure in order to meet those markets, you are just using common sense approaches to manage your forest lands, and definitely you are doing it responsibly. So that is my 2 cents on these issues, because in India, I have seen, you know, I started my forestry in India and all other places. Government is good, but relying too much on government for forestry is not a good idea, because of the fact that government has a lot of other priorities, not just forest, right? And money is always tight, no matter where you are. So it'll be good to get some policy support, especially from government, but at the same time, work as a community, internationally, nationally, where we are promoting collectively use of more wood, so the resources are coming in, and use those resources to take care of forestry. So that should be the approach. And that approach is definitely helpful in US South, because we have a very good industry. For example, in Georgia alone, the economic impact of forestry industry is $36 billion, B as in B. So every 6th person in Georgia works in forestry. And as I just showed you in my presentation, 92% of land is private forest land, right? Only 8%, 10% is government owned land. And you can definitely see the differences in terms of management when it comes to forest lands versus private lands. And those people are still doing forestry. They are taking care of their forest lands. Loggers are doing it responsibly in terms of following BMPs. BMP rates are touching 95%, because everything is connected to markets. and markets are promoting sustainable forestry. So when it comes to managing forestry, we should definitely not discount the power of markets. Definitely government support is appreciated, but definitely we have to work as a community to make forest better for everybody.
Okay, thank you very much, Puneet. Really very important in your remarks, and I think that we will consider that, and it is very interesting. So I do not see any more raised hands, but I think that it is we have a few minutes left just for last remarks and interventions from Finland. I see remarks that it is a best managed practice guidelines could be a solution. If we see all presentations from private forest owners perspective, so it is very essential that we should understand that investment into the forest, it is a long-term investment, which do not give results immediately, but after decades. Forestry should be profitable to be able to invest and also competitive. And if we look to the Green Deal declaration, so both the economical growth and competitiveness, it is the two main aspects just to guide all political decisions. But when we come to reality, so especially in the EU forest strategy communication, we see that it is very unbalanced, more linked to biodiversity protection, environment issues, but forgetting social and economical aspects. So I think that to work sustainably, to have sustainable forest management, we really need to understand that it should be all decisions made based on scientific knowledge, practical experience, but not on emotions. Emotions may be good for short-term political issues, but not for long-term prosperity in forest. So Inge, I think that I do not see any hands raised now, and we respond to most of the comments in chat. So maybe you can summarize this today's our dialogue and conversation, and to describe a bit in the remaining minutes what is expected for two more discussions during this project. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Algis, and thank you to you for conducting this very interesting discussion. I would say this has exceeded my expectations. I knew that I had good people on the panels and on the speaker lists, but really this was fantastic to hear all these views and hearing you also reflecting on each other's views. So thank you very much for your contributions, and thank you to the audience. Also for asking good questions that also ignited some good questions and reflections from the panel. Yes, I should say thank you also to Puneet for mentioning who funded the workshop. I forgot to say that in the beginning. So it was the Nordic Forest Research. So thank you to them for providing this opportunity for us to talk together, and also to EIA Bioenergy for supporting us as well and spreading the invitations widely. And then finally also the Danish Energy Agency, who is funding my participation in EIA Bioenergy Task 45. And what's coming next? We will try to put up videos and materials, and I should advertise that we just put up a document with field tours. We were so daring to promise field tours, but we could not really find a way to put it into these sessions. But you can find this document on the workshop website, and I highly encourage you to watch some of those videos, also to get that sense of what is happening on the land. There are also some documents that speaks more about the sustainable forest management in the regions of the people that are in and countries that are of people that are in the organizing committee here. So go to our website and look there, and there will be more materials coming available as we move on. And move on means moving on to the 26th and the 27th of October. On the 26th, we will focus on the carbon calculations and all the tricky issues around understanding how to do these, and that they can be done in many different ways, and what questions can you answer if you do it one way or the other. So that's for the 26th, and for the 27th, it's about the policy science interface. So conducting good and relevant, high quality research to support policies in this area. And I was really happy to see BMP's best management practices being highlighted today. I think apart from also these national level initiatives and the certification, then BMPs is another area that is really important to help to ensure sustainable forest management. And that will be also something that will be on the agenda for the 27th. So encouraging you to sign up for these as well if you haven't done it yet. And I guess that will be my last words. Thank you to all of you for really great contributions today.
Yeah, thank you. And videos will be available later of the session also.
Yes.
Yeah. Have a nice time.